See, it was a good year. I was around. Hadn't been around long, but I was around in this year. So if you're just joining us, welcome. And you're telling me in a private chat, what's the year that we need to know when it comes to lead? You're a firecracker, huh? Close to it. Yeah. So we need to know this year when it comes to lead. And the magic year with lead is 1978. And specifically, what lead says is anything built prior to 1978. So what I'm telling you is December 31st, 1977 and back. If the home was built prior to 1978. Um, someone said 1992, I think, and I appreciate that. That's the year that the act came to be. So we got the Lead-Based Paint Act, the rules that we follow today in 92, but the magic year for lead-based paint is 1978. That's the only year you need to know in Unit 20. It just happens to be that asbestos was also banned that year as well. So that's handy, yes. But we don't need to know that when it comes to asbestos, just with lead. So I only have like, did I hit record? I only have like maybe 5 minutes left in hello, in Unit 20. So let's wrap this up real quick so we can move on to bigger, better things. There's a lot of acts, rules, etc. when it comes to these environmental issues. I remember we said anything environmental, I think the best place to start is with the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. But one act in specific, and I don't know who names these things. Can I just call it CERCLA? The Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act. Don't get too bogged down on that. This is just more of an FYI. But CERCLA is what offers federal funding for some of these environmental hazards. Remember, we talked about, I'd say the big one is the underground storage tanks, because once those contents leak out and they get in our groundwater, they can go anywhere that the water will go. And if you'll just look, if you guys will turn with me to page 534, 535, or near the end of Unit 20. But what you just have there, and again, I wouldn't get bogged down in this. This is just more FYI. But CERCLA provides some more specifics. So there's the North Carolina Leaky Petroleum Underground Storage Tank Cleanup Act that we mentioned the other day. The North Carolina Coastal Area Management Act, CAMA, Mountain Ridge Protection Act, Dredge and Fill Act, and Sediment Pollution Control Act. So just some examples of things that CERCLA does, again, to better protect the environment. So let's wrap this up. When it comes to these environmental issues, the owner is the one that's going to carry the responsibility. Let me rephrase that. The current owner, no matter if they caused the issue or it was caused by the previous owner. Whomever is the current owner is the one that's going to carry the most liability. They're going to be the one responsible for cleanup. They're going to be responsible for making sure that they are in compliance. So these environmental issues are typically going to be on the owner. And that's what all these acts are here, is to help the owner when these things come up. There's funding sometimes available, of course, protocol, rules, things that they need to follow. So that's why they're here. So what's this mean for us, for the brokers? Well, as mentioned at the beginning of this unit, our biggest responsibility with these environmental disclosures, or these environmental issues, we told it, is to disclose. Once we learn of an issue, and I don't really care how you learn about it, but once you learn of an issue, we have a duty to disclose. What did we say that it meant to disclose? I can see your mouths move. Yeah. It
To
means,
tell.
yeah, that's right. It means to tell. See something, say something, right? Learn something, say something. That's what we mean, you guys. I'm not an environmental expert. I'm not I don't have the tools, but I do have a duty to disclose. And we're going to get more and more into this disclosure thing as we get into Unit 7. So this is why we did Unit 20 now, because most of Unit 20 is about these disclosures. Once we learn of lead in the home, once we learn of mold or asbestos, our duty is not to treat it, not to try to diagnose it. Our duty is to disclose. Remember, stay in your lane. And I don't even think that took me 5 minutes, did it? So that got us through Unit 20. We were so close. So those key terms back on page 521. Your key point review on page 536. And then your student quiz. Your student quiz on page 539. Any questions on Unit 20? Very scary unit. Makes you think, doesn't it? Like we said the other day, a lot of these building products that we were using to build, when we first started using them, we didn't know they were bad for us. But as soon as they learned that lead was harmful to children, and that asbestos could cause, lung cancer, then we said, okay, we got to stop. I guess the scariest thing to me about Unit 20 is, what are we building with today that we haven't learned the harmful effects with yet? Unfortunately, that's what's going to keep you up at night, right? That's the concern with these environmental issues. That's right. The good old days, right, Corey? So once we learn of an issue, once we learn of an incident, that's when the EPA, that's when acts and legislations kick in. And unfortunately, a lot of times we're just guinea pigs, aren't we? So there it is.
Julie, I have a quick question.
Yes.
Just for the CERCLA, I read that it was created in 1980. I just want to make sure that I have it correct. And then you said 1978. So which one would be the correct answer?
So the 78 is the year you need to know, and that's the year, that's about lead, the lead-based paint.
Okay.
So don't worry about any other years in Unit 20 except for 78. Anything built prior to 78 could have lead, because we were still using it, paint and stuff. Okay, y'all want a Kahoot? Yay, grab your phones. And let me get you guys a QR code. This Kahoot is on Units 4, 5, and 6, nothing on 20 because we just got done talking about it. So question or two from 4, question or two from 5, and a question or two from 6. And we wait patiently for it to load. Load faster, thank you. So here is coming, wait for it. There we go. There's your QR code for this Kahoot. If you're going on the website or the app, you need a game pin. So your game pin is 993746 for this Kahoot. And then once you're in, pick your avatar. I don't remember if they pick it or they assign it. But you put your name in. And again, you guys, if you want to use nicknames in Kahoot, I'm fine. I don't even make y'all play. I don't even make y'all Kahoot if you don't want to. So if you don't want to play on your phone, that's fine. Just play along in your mind. Just another minute or so to get in if you want to play. There's a theory that real estate agents are just competitive in nature. Sometimes we're at competitive listings, sometimes we're competing for buyers. So Kahoot might bring out your true competitiveness. Don't let your phone go to sleep. If you do, you'll wake it back up and you'll come back. Anybody in that wants to play? All right. Something popped on. All right. We ready? Let's Kahoot. Units 4, 5, and 6. Question number 1. The system of legal description that defines a parcel of land by its parameter is the Five seconds. Legal description by the parcel is the meets and bounds. Yes, the meets and bounds is what gives you the tour, the parameter. So you start and end at the point of beginning, and you use calls and directions, also known as meets and bounds, to go from monument to monument to monument. And what you have is the lines, the parameter. The governmental rectangular survey system is out west, so we don't see that much here. Our land is different than out west. They're a lot flatter once you get out west far enough. We have mountains and foothills and all that. Questions on this one? So let's see who got it right the fastest. Chrissy's out the gate, followed by Heather and Luana. Is that right? Did I say that right, Luana? You can hit your space bar.
It's Liliana. Thank you.
It's Leanna?
Liliana?
Leanna. Thank you.
Close.
Say it one more time for me.
Liliana?
Leanna.
Yes.
Leanna. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Third, followed by Geet. Love it. And then Bex. Leanna. Question number 2. In a North Carolina real estate transaction, excise taxes are the responsibility of the Four seconds. Excise taxes are the responsibility of the seller. Seller gets taxed one more time when they go to sell it. They only got one last opportunity to collect taxes on you for this property, right? So when you go to sell it, they're going to collect one more time, and that's excise tax. I got to say, I love nobody ever says real estate agent. Y'all like, I don't know what it is, but I ain't paying for it. So you put it on either the buyer or the seller, but guys, that's a seller expense, a tax that they have when they sell it. Again, we're going to talk more about buyers and sellers debits, what they owe when they go to sell and buy, that kind of thing. All that comes in Unit 21. Questions on this one?
The buyer is never responsible for excise taxes?
Not in North Carolina.
Okay.
That's my disclaimer. Other states may be different, but North Carolina, seller gets to pay it.
Quick question.
Mhm.
What are these taxes? How are they generated?
So it's based off of the purchase price. So we take the purchase price and divide by 500 and then round up to the nearest whole dollar. Let's see what we got. Heather came up, geeked up. Alex is on the board. LaDawn's on the board. Kayla's on the board. Rachel is our highest climber this round. She's up 15 places. Question number 3. Which of the following deeds contains no express or implied warranties? No warranties. Seconds. The no warranty deed is our quitclaim deed. The quitclaim deed says what I got, you get. So if I got nothing, what you gonna get? Absolutely nothing. I'm not making you any promises whatsoever. Typically where we see the quitclaim deed is maybe we're creating an easement, maybe we're correcting an error, maybe marriage or divorce. You're not conveying. General warranty deed has the most warranties. That's the one that we probably see the most often. Special warranty deed has a few. And then the trustee's deed is used when you have a trustee involved. So the end of unit 2, we talked about trusts. You could set up in a trust instead of like the will or something. So the attorney would be the trustee and they would handle the affairs on behalf of the beneficiary. So quitclaim deed, no warranties. Questions on this one? So we got Heather, geeked, and Alex stayed up. Corey's on the board. LaDawn's still on. Beauty is our highest climber, up 12 places this round. Question number 4. Which of the following is an essential element of a valid North Carolina deed? Six seconds. Essential element of a valid deed. We're looking for those words of conveyance. Let's hold your place in your book wherever you are. Let's turn to page 87. Let's look at these. Look at these one more time. This does tend to be a problem topic, so it's another reason why I like to Kahoot, because this gives us an opportunity to look at these essential elements one more time. Remember, when we're looking at these essential elements on page 87, anytime we're trying to determine the validity of a document, who is the one that gets to determine if it's valid or not? I see mouths move. I'm seeing judge. Yeah. So the judge is the one that gets to determine if it's valid or not. And if the judge has determined the validity of the deed, then the judge is looking for these essential elements. Remember our required cake ingredients. You have to have certain ingredients to have a cake. Yes. The judge has to have certain elements to have a valid deed. So those are on page 87. And then we flip over to page 88 and we find the icing, the sprinkles, the ice cream, the things that enhance the cake, the things that make the cake better. It's not the judge that requires the deed to be recorded. What is the act that requires the deed to be recorded?
Connor.
Connor Act, that's right. Connor is the one. It's not the judge that says it's got to be recorded. The judge doesn't care. Connor Act steps in and says it's got to be recorded. Also, the judge is looking for signature of the grantor. So remember our ORs and EEs, the giver and the receivee. So when we're talking about the deed, the grantee is the buyer. They don't sign the deed. Only the seller does, the grantor, when they're conveying it. Please spend a few minutes with 87 and 88. Like I said, this does tend to be a problem topic. This is a good one they like to throw at you to make sure you understand these essential elements. What questions do I have on this one?
So I'm sorry, what was the correct answer then?
Words of conveyance.
Okay, thank you.
The seller or the grantor, there's got to be some kind of verbiage in there with their intent to give you their deed. And that's what we're saying with that words of conveyance. I, the grantor, give you, the grantee, the deed to 123 Main Street, for example. It shows their intent.
I'm laughing because you said put a star beside that.
Do you have a
So-
star beside that?
And I still got it wrong.
This is why we Kahoot, Rachel. Like I said, it gives me enough. Y'all aren't my first pre-licensing class, so this gives me another opportunity to make sure that we see that. When
Yeah.
you see the word valid, stop and think judge. What's the judge looking for? That's what the validity of any document is what the judge is determined. Did I hear another?
I got a question. Can we do Cahoots ourselves outside of class?
There are some in there. I can't validate them. I don't know if they're good or not, but Sandra, we're recording, so you can go back through the recording and pick
Okay.
these up again. So
Okay,
yes, just not in Kahoot.
okay.
But if you go to Kahoot, I don't know, y'all, be careful, because if you go to Kahoot, there are some real estate instructors that make their Kahoots available. But I don't know who they are. I don't know if they know what they're talking about. I don't know what state they're standing in. So if they're not Kahooting on North Carolina, all y'all are going to do is get yourselves confused. So just please, please, please proceed with caution. Anything else on this one? Are we good? Can I get some thumbs ups? Anybody else have the star next to it? If you don't, you do now, right? Good. Thank you, Rachel, for your for your honesty. All right, so let's see. What happened this time? Heather and Geeked stayed on. Corey came up. LaDawn's still on. Shelby came up. Tink is our highest climber. She's up 16 places this round. Question number 5, restrictive covenants. Five seconds. Restrictive covenants apply to and bind all successive owners of the property. What's the fancy way of saying that? Restrictive covenants are appurtenant. What's it mean if they're appurtenant? They run with the land, not the developer. They run with the land. Once the developer's done developing, they've built the last house, the last property, they're out, the covenants remain. And all owners will be all owners will be responsible for those covenants. Questions on this one? Of course, Ashley. Uh-oh, Geeked and Heather looks like they might be the two to beat. LaDawn's trying, Corey's trying, Shelby's trying. Courtney's our highest climber this round. She's up 8 places. Number 6, the primary intent of zoning is to Five seconds. Primary intent of zoning is to control how we use the land. It's a land use control. Specifically, it's a public land use control. Remember, the only difference in public and private is how it's enforced. So, let's back up for just a second. In Unit 2, we said the majority of people own fee simple absolute. Fee simple absolute says you have the highest form of ownership. You own the land and the air above it and the ground beneath it. You can do whatever you want to on your property within the confines of the law. What's one of the laws you got to follow? These land use controls. If you're public, you're dealing with zoning. If you're in an HOA, you're looking at those covenants. Please remember too, you guys, that zoning is local in nature. So there is no statewide ordinance. Raleigh is not going to dictate zoning outside of Raleigh. Zoning is completely local. So zoning can look one way in Winston-Salem. It could look differently in Kernersville. It could look differently in Greensboro. You don't go far from city to city to city, do you? But you could be dealing with 3 different types of zoning. So it's local in nature. Protecting the residential neighborhoods from commercial properties, commercial encroachments. We did talk about that buffer zoning. So there are things intact in place to try to prevent that. But again, what we're looking for is the primary intent, the big picture of zoning. It's a land use control. Questions on this one? See what's happening. Geeked and Heather and Corey, LaDawn, those are the 4 to beat. Jessica W's on the board. Christian's our highest climber, up 9 places. Last question, let's see what happens here. Number 7, which of the following best describes a variance? Five seconds. A variance is an exception. If you're requesting a variance, you are asking the zoning board for permission to break the rules. How many property owners can claim a variance, can request a variance? Just one and only one. If you have multiple property owners, we might be looking at a spot zoning or something like that. But with a variance, one and only one property owner, and they have to prove a unique hardship. They have to prove to the zoning board that because of their zoning laws, I can't use my land. I can't use my property. So I'm coming to you, zoning board, and asking you for permission to break the rules. Questions on this one? Right. So we got our final podium for this Kahoot. 3rd place Kahooter is Corey. Our 2nd place is Geeked. You'll have to tell me in a private chat who you are. And our 1st place is Heather. How popped up out of nowhere. I got runners up of Jessica and LaDawn. Good Kahoot, you guys. What questions do I have? Like I said, you're recording, so you may want to make a note. What do we start? About 5:45, 5:50, something like that? You want to go back to this recording and watch this Kahoot again? Haha. And I think it's good, like Sandra said, maybe to come back and review. I'll get some of those topics. How many of you are able to review? You're utilizing those YouTube videos? Are you watching them at work, listening to them in the car? That's another, again, just another kind of opportunity to, I cannot stress the importance of repetition with this material. The more times you hear it, it starts clicking, the better off you are. Questions? All right. I need to stop sharing just for 1 second. So you guys sit tight. And I'm going to, I got to grab a PowerPoint so we can get started on Unit 7. In Unit 7, we officially are getting into agency. Before we do that, though, I want to have a brief conversation with you guys. Just waiting on it to come up. Let me come back and get you guys. Where'd you guys go? I lost you. There you are. Let me come back and grab you guys. Unit 7 is actually 7 and 8 are our agency units. 7 is more about understanding agency, creating agency, the laws and the rules that revolve around agency. 8 tends to be more about agency in practice. In 8, we're going to get into specifically our agency agreements. We're going to talk about working specifically with sellers and buyers. We also talk about your commission, but not until we get to Unit 8. So please do not ask me about your commission in Unit 7. Because the truth is, you guys, we got to understand and create agency before you're going to get paid. So naturally, Unit 7 comes first. I promise you, we will talk about your commission, but we need to understand what it is you're getting paid for. And that's what we're doing in Unit 7. We will be here for several classes. So if you haven't had a chance to get into agency, we're going on. You have the weekend to get yourself caught up. If you've been through Unit 7, go through it again. If you've been through it twice, go through it again. Remember what I just said, the power of repetition. We're getting ready to see lots of red stars in Unit 7. And you know what? That reminds me. Hold that thought. I've talked a lot about red stars and weight of material and what's more important than others. And we mentioned that 7, 8, 9, and 10 are heavily tested units. I know I've said this, but I also think it's equally important before we get into Unit 7 that I share with you where I get my knowledge. Like, how do I know to tell you that there's lots of red stars in Unit 7? How do I know to tell you that Unit 7, 8, 9, and 10 are heavily tested? And where I get my information is actually available in 2 sources. Source number 1 is this syllabus. It's in your welcome section of the online learning system. The North Carolina Real Estate Commission provides us and you with the syllabus. Again, they say, if you're familiar with what's in the syllabus, then you will be prepared for your state exam. You guys remember our objectives here. My job is to prepare you for the state exam. Part of preparing you for the state exam is to get you through my exam. So we are covering what's in the syllabus. I wrote this class with the syllabus in my hand. So we know the different levels, we know the information. We refer to green star, yellow star, and red star. The syllabus, we get that information from the syllabus. So what the syllabus calls level 1, we call a green star. I just think a green star is prettier to look at than level 1. What the syllabus calls level 2, we call a yellow star, the application piece. And what the syllabus calls level 3 is what we call the red star. So we need to be able to, when we see these red stars, don't just tell me what it means, but analyze it. You know, study it, know it very, very well. In some cases, I should be able to hand you my PowerPoints and say, you know, can you teach this? That's the level of understanding that we need to have with this material, specifically with agency. So if, you know, and I don't expect you guys to read this because let's face it, it's 132 pages, but you have it here available. And if you look, each topic has a level 1, level 2, level 3. So that's how we get the red star information. So I can tell you that this is important. The second source that I have on this material is in something called the Real Estate Licensing in North Carolina booklet, also known as the Relink book. Now we're going to talk about this in a few weeks. This is the booklet that says, yay, I passed Julie's end of class exam. Now what do I do? How do I apply for my state exam? What do I need to go? What do I need to know to go to the state exam, etc.? Heed warning. This book is about to change. At some point in February, this book is going to change. So it's okay to look at it, but we're going to wait until it changes before we get really, really into it. I got a meeting. The commission's actually doing a webinar either the next week or the following week about the changes. So we're not going to get too into depth about this booklet because we know a change is coming. The content is going to stay the same. I'll go ahead and share with you guys right now. The testing center is changing. Right now they use a testing center and that venue is going to change on March 1st. So once we have that information, they'll provide us a new booklet and I'll be able to talk to you guys in a few weeks about what to expect with the new testing center. As far as that testing center goes right now, you know about what I know. So just bear with me until we get the information. I absolutely will share it with you guys. So the venue is changing, which means the content that we need to know is going to stay about the same. So just, you guys are in a good time because we don't have to worry about you. All you have to worry about is the new testing center. So within this booklet on page, it's page 16 of the booklet. They give you a breakdown. It's 16 and 17 actually of the booklet. And they give you a breakdown. The topics are as they relate to the syllabus. And then they actually tell you how many questions you can expect to see on your national exam on this topic and how many questions you can expect to see on your state specific section on this topic. They give you this information. So if we look at like property taxation and assessment, you can expect to see a total of 2 questions on property taxation. If we look at brokerage relationships, which is what we're getting ready to start, you're looking at 22 questions. Do you want to spend all your time studying the topic that you're only going to see 2 questions? Or do you want to spend your time focusing on the topics you're going to see 22 questions? So we take this, which again, this is not changing. The content is not changing. It's just your venue. So we take this and we can kind of align it with the syllabus to determine these heavily tested topics, these heavily red stars, and where we're going to see the most questions. Now, with that being said, this is for your state exam. The weight on my exam is the same. I can't guarantee you the numbers will be the same, but the weight is going to be the same. So again, on my exam, do you think you're going to see more on basic contract law or land use controls? Do you guys see what I'm saying there? So this is how we know what we really, really need to focus on. So again, I just think I think it's important that you guys have this information because once you leave my exam or once you leave my class, you're going to be preparing for that state exam and you may find yourself thinking, gosh, is this really important? Maybe it's a topic, maybe it's, land use controls and you think, whatever, it's only 3 questions and you move on, right? You choose to spend all your time on agency. Ideally, we want you looking over everything. But what do we just see? 130 some pages in that syllabus? So it's a lot to look over. Can we agree with that? So again, we'll talk about this. We'll talk about your application process, how you can get in to take the state exam. It is way too early to talk about this right now. Plus knowing we got some changes coming. Like I said, we got a webinar. I cannot remember if it's next week or the following week, but it's on my calendar with a star next to it. So I make sure I'm there. And we get the information so I can relay it on to you. So the syllabus and the Relink book are 2 great sources to help you guys know where to focus your energy. Questions on that?
Julie, I have a question. So when we take like our midterm and stuff like that, we take that during class time?
The midterm, we're actually going to leave it open for like a week. We'll let you guys take that and we'll talk about that. We're, still a little ways from that. But yeah, we'll give you like a week to take that 1.5 hour test. Okay. So Relink and syllabus, more on those, or at least more on Relink. They have told us, I think the last webinar I had with the commission a couple weeks ago, they do like a quarterly town hall meeting where they just kind of open it up, let everybody, and there were 110 instructors and directors on this call. It was a big call. And they made us all on mute and say that we understand that they are not changing the content. So we are all been reassured that what we're talking about today is still going to apply when you guys go in March. I do not want you guys to worry about that. The content is not changing. What's changing is the venue. And again, as soon as I get more information, we'll share that. All right, so Unit 7, Brokers, Relationships, Law, and Practice. Again, we got to understand and create and practice agency before I can get you guys paid. And that's what Unit 7 is about. So our guide, our roadmap for Unit 7, we're going to explain agency. We're going to talk about the different types of agency relationships. Agency means we're working with customers and clients. So we're going to differentiate between the two. And we're going to talk about what that means for the broker. What is my role when I'm working with a client? What is my role when I'm working with a customer? We're going to talk about material facts. We're going to talk specific about material facts. We're going to talk about what is and is not a material fact. And then we're going to talk about our agency disclosure. And we're going to talk about our duty to tell consumers where I stand in this transaction. Where do I stand in this relationship? Who can remind me what the main purpose of the North Carolina Real Estate Commission is?
Protect the public.
Protect the public, absolutely. So by disclosing our agency status, by informing the consumer about who I am and what that should mean to them is a big part of our agency disclosures. So before we get into Unit 7, everybody put your pencils down just for 1 second. And before we get into Unit 7, I just want to introduce you to some ideas. Rest assured, we will see them again in Unit 7, but I just want to introduce you to some ideas to start getting your brain wrapped around some things to make sure that we're all starting off on the same page. The first idea I want to introduce you guys to. North Carolina is a caveat emptor state. Here's your Latin lesson for the day. Caveat emptor means let the buyer beware. In North Carolina, it is the buyer's responsibility to know what's going on before they know before they purchase the property. Sellers aren't required to disclose much. The onus is on the buyer. Sellers can choose to disclose, but caveat emptor says whose responsibility is this? It is the buyer's responsibility to learn about the property. FYI, when the buyer hires an agent, we agree to take on that responsibility with them. So caveat emptor means let the buyer beware. All homes in North Carolina are sold as is. Not only does the seller have to disclose, the seller doesn't have to repair. They don't have to fix. They don't have to do anything. They don't have to pick up a hammer. They don't have to change a light bulb. They can choose to. It's all negotiable. It is all negotiable. But so homes are sold as is unless agreed otherwise. There is no such thing as a perfect home. What? There is no such thing as a perfect home. All homes have problems, even brand new construction that they just put the doorknobs on. There are issues, there are problems. Who builds homes? People. People make mistakes, right? People have issues. So there's no such thing as a perfect home. It's up to the buyer to know what they're buying before they buy. And all homes in North Carolina are as is. When we get to Unit 10, we're going to meet our standard offer to purchase and contract. And there is a very important sentence in the offer to purchase and contract that says this property is being sold in its current condition. What obligation does the seller have to fix anything? Nothing, unless agreed otherwise. So homes are as is. Seller doesn't disclose. Seller doesn't fix, unless they want to, of course. Understand this now. The consumer does not hire you. The agency relationship is between the consumer and the firm that you are affiliated with. Agency relationship is with the client and the firm. It's the firm's listing. It's the firm's buyer. The firm allows you to work with their seller. The firm allows you to work with their buyer. So if it's the firm's client, the consumer, who do you think the commission belongs to? Not you. The commission belongs to the firm. The firm gets paid, and then they pay you a portion of their commission. How much are they going to pay you? We're talking about that in Unit 8. I will not address any questions about commission right now. Oh no, Thalia. Yeah, it doesn't take long for issues sometimes, does it? So with that being said, let me say something about your commission. Typically speaking, the seller pays the listing firm. The listing firm agrees to share their commission with whomever brings the buyer. I'm going to say one of the bigger problem topics. When we talk about commission, we discuss it in our agency agreement with the seller. We also discuss it with our agency agreement with the buyer. In order to protect your commission, we're going to see it in both agency agreements. By the way, we look at our agency agreements in Unit 8. So we'll talk about creating agency, and then in Unit 8, we will form agency using our agency agreements, and we'll talk about your commission and how we can ensure you're going to get paid. But typically speaking, the seller pays the listing firm. The listing firm shares their commission with the firm that brings the buyer, typically speaking. We've said this a few times. I am a fact finder. I am providing buyers and sellers with the information so they can make an informed decision. Are you going to be the one to make a mortgage payment on this house? The 30-year mortgage payment? Probably not. We don't need to be making decisions. We provide them the information so they can make informed decisions. So again, just introducing you to a couple theories. We'll see these again, I promise. The other thing I want to introduce you to, and you may want to jot this down, starting to introduce you to the verbiage. I'm teaching y'all to speak broker as we speak. And who you're called or what you're called may depend on who you're working with. So for those of us working with the buyer, you could be referred to as a buyer's agent or a buyer's firm. The technical term is the selling agent and the selling firm. That's the verbiage we're going to see in our agency agreements, our offer to purchase and contract. Those working with the seller, we call the seller's agent, seller's firm. The technical term that we see in our paperwork is the listing agent and the listing firm. The ings are the verbs, the actions. Either you're listing it for the seller or you're helping the buyer, you're selling it to your buyer. So introduce, and we're going to see this slide like 3 more times, at least, well, maybe twice. We're going to see this slide a few more times in our agency discussions in unit 7 and 8. So the selling is working with the buyer. The listing is working with the seller. Also in unit 7 is when we start introducing you to laws and rules. There's license law and there's commission rule. License law is state law, North Carolina General Statute. So North Carolina General Statute does provide us with some laws. Commission rule, the North Carolina Real Estate Commission does have the power to create reasonable rules. So we start introducing you to this idea of law and rule. And I don't ask you guys to read much when it comes to law and rule. But one rule I think you should read, and I will show you in just 1 second where you can find it, is Commission Rule A.0104. And this is the commission rule on our agency agreements and disclosures. I think you guys should read this. It's like 2.5 pages, and it's rule. I'm not going to lie, it's not a fun read. So you may want to break it up into chunks, break it up into sections. I think you should read it. And when you're done, I think you should read it again. I think you should read this several times between now, because this is what is coming from the North Carolina Real Estate Commission regarding our agency agreements and disclosures. So let's show you where it is so we know what it is we want to read. And again, you guys, it's rule. It's not fun. It's not like going to be reading your favorite author here. It's actually down here in the Julie folder. Yeah, it's down here in the Julie folder. And we have Commission Rule 58A.0104, Agency Agreements and Disclosures. I think you should read it. When you're done, read it again. Remember what we just said about that power of repetition. For the other laws and rules, I provide you with the number for reference. This is the only commission rule I ask you guys to read. There's a bunch of them. So we're going to refer to commission rule. We're going to refer to license law. But this is the one I think you guys should sit down and read. Everybody see where it's at? Thumbs up, please. Under the Julie folder, Commission Rule 58A.0104. Questions so far? All right, let's go ahead and take a break. We'll come back. We're actually going to get back into unit 7, get officially started. And we're back. Cameras are coming back on. My real estate team did a photo shoot a couple years ago. And the photographer, I'll never forget, they said, some people take picture and tell you to say cheese. But what he tells everybody is say money, because it's impossible to say money without smiling. So as I take screenshot for attendance, everybody try to say money without, you can't do it, can you? Because what do we like? Money. He was good. We had fun. All right. So let's talk about agency. So in the beginning of Unit 7, introducing you to something referred to as the common law of agency. Now, I don't want you guys to think broad with the common law of agency. When we refer to the common law of agency, it's not just a specific law. The common law of agency is comprised from several different places. Common law of agency derived from the early days of England when there was a king. And the king expected to be treated a certain way, didn't he? The king wanted all his people to treat him a certain way. And that was kind of the basis of the common law of agency. Over time, the common law of agency has evolved, and we took other things into consideration. Other things came to mean what common law of agency means today. Contract law. There are lawsuits. We're getting ready to talk about one of those lawsuits in just a second. Lawsuits help form the agency, how we know it today. Things change as the law changes. Things change as lawsuits are settled. As mentioned, we also have the North Carolina Real Estate License Law. That is a North Carolina General Statute. That's what that NCGS means. North Carolina General Statute, specifically 93A. This is a state law, straight from our house, straight from the state house. And then we also have North Carolina Real Estate Commission Rule, which is Chapter 58A. Again, I'll give you North Carolina General Statute. I will give you Chapter 58A just for reference. So if you want to look it up, I think I've mentioned this a few times, but at some point by the time we're done, within the next few weeks, I should say, we're going to go out to the Real Estate Commission's website and kind of poke around, introduce you to a few things. But I think it's important that you guys know where to find license law and commission rule. Because once you leave me, once you get your license, you may find yourself at some point in your career asking yourselves, what would the Real Estate Commission have to say about this? So you need to know where to find these resources. So give me some time. We'll go out there and kind of poke around the commission's website so you can be familiar with this stuff when you guys are practicing. So Chapter 7 starts, and I'm going to stay on this slide for a minute, so just hear me out. But Chapter 7 starts with kind of a background with agency and how we practice agency today in North Carolina. Buyer's agency, the idea that buyers can be represented by real estate agents, didn't always exist. Once upon a time ago, we only had seller representations. The buyers were not represented by real estate agents. I think the best way we can understand what that might look like is if you ever have been car shopping and you walk onto a car lot and the salesman kind of pops up out of nowhere, right? Hey folks, how you doing today, right? Like, where'd he come from, or she? Who does that car salesman represent? The dealership, right? Do they have your best interest in mind? No, they want to sell you a car because that's what they were hired to do from the dealership. So as a buyer of a car, you go from lot to lot to lot until you find the car you want, right? So you go onto this guy's lot, you don't find what you want, you go on to the next lot, and so on and so on. That was kind of what agency looked like before we got buyer's agency. You went to one real estate firm, said, show me what listings you have. If you didn't like their product, you went to the next real estate firm until you did find a product. And they never represented the buyer. All representation was with the seller. So then there was an incident. There was a lawsuit, court or contract law that changed all this. And this is the Adena lawsuit you guys see in your books there in Unit 7. And it happened in Minnesota. And there was a person that bought a house, and they truly believed, based on the agent's actions, that the agent had their best interest in mind. But if there's no buyer agency, that agent couldn't have had that buyer's best interest. But their actions, the way they handled the transaction, this buyer genuinely thought they got me, they got my back. It went down after closing. A lawsuit came out. It was one of those, you know how those things work. And then like 200 other people stood up and said, oh yeah, me too. I thought I was represented too. And it turned into this law case, or this big case. The settlement from this real estate firm that started this was for $19.9 million. All those buyers that thought that they had representation, and come to find out they didn't. So that's what kind of kick-started this. Now, what that did is it caused all states to review their agency laws and consider if buyer's agency is something that we should adopt. North Carolina did not adopt buyer agency until the mid-90s. Y'all, that wasn't that long ago, was it? You got agents out there practicing today that can tell you stories about life before buyer agency. Those are great ones to sit down and talk to, by the way. So as time evolved, these contract laws involved, then we discovered a need for buyer's agency in North Carolina. Understand, not all states have buyer agency today. Some states still don't practice buyer agency. But in this class, the only state that we care about is North Carolina. We don't care about any other state. We're not going to talk about any other state. Stay in North Carolina with me. And in North Carolina, we do practice buyer agency. And a lot of that comes from, again, the outcome of that Adena lawsuit. It was just a good opportunity for people to sit down and revisit their policies. So North Carolina decided at that time to introduce buyer's agency, and that's kind of where we are today. So just a brief little history lesson for you so you know what got us to where we are today. As mentioned earlier, caveat emptor. Move your mouth. What does this mean? Caveat emptor means let the buyer beware. And if you say it like that, you'll never forget it. Let the buyer beware. Sounds scary, doesn't it? It is scary to buy a house in North Carolina. Why? Because the seller doesn't have to disclose much. There's only 1-2 things I can think of the seller doesn't have to disclose. And one of them is if they know the presence of lead in the home, which we talked about back in our environmental unit. If they know they have to disclose. Caveat emptor is a state law. Lead-based paint is a federal law. Federal is going to override state. So when we say they don't have to disclose much, lead-based paint is one of them. We'll get to the other one in Unit 8. What we're saying with caveat emptor is that the burden of discovery is on the buyer to investigate the property before they purchase it. The buyer has an opportunity in the contract that we will see in Unit 10. They have the opportunity to learn as much about the property as they possibly can and decide, now knowing what I know, do I want to move forward with or terminate this transaction? Again, we're getting there in Unit 10, one step at a time. Sellers don't have to disclose much. Nobody, you and I included, has a golden ticket to lie. Sometimes not disclosing is better than nothing at all, right? Better than opening your mouth and letting a lie fall out. So even though the sellers don't have to disclose, they are not allowed to lie, or they shouldn't lie. And we got several seller disclosures forms that the seller provides the buyer. We will talk about those when we get to Unit 8 as well. One thing at a time. So here's your first big fancy word in Unit 7. Yeah.
Question.
Uh-huh.
I think earlier you said you are fact finder. We are fact finder
Correct.
to give our seller information to make an informed decision.
And
So when
buyers.
and we find out these facts, we ought to tell them, right, about it.
I have to disclose what I know.
Would you know? Okay.
We don't have many secrets from our buyers and sellers, Benjamin. Once I learn of something, I have a duty to disclose. Absolutely. So this first big fancy word that we see in Unit 7 is fiduciary. A fiduciary relationship is a relationship of trust. The person that hires us, the buyer or the seller that hires us, should trust that we have their best interest in mind. They should trust that by hiring us, that means I got one priority. And that one priority is my buyer or seller, the one that hires me. So fiduciary is a relationship based on trust. I'm going to put their interest above all others. Sometimes that includes my own. We'll talk about conflict of interest, more on that. Then on page 137, we start with some definitions. Again, I think a big part of this class, 101, knowing what the word means. Remember, please always remember, you got a glossary in the back of your book. So if you're reading, if you're studying, if you see a question and you don't know what a word means, I really need you to look it up. So let's define some agency words. Agency is that fiduciary relationship between the client and the firm. Remember, buyers and sellers don't hire the individual. They hire the firm. This idea of agency is the idea that one party represents another. Somebody is standing in place of another. I'm standing side by side, hip to hip, elbow to elbow with the one that hires me. That's this idea of agency. The principal or the client, used interchangeably. This is the one that hires us. Maybe it's the buyer, maybe it's the seller. They hire us by entering into an agency agreement with us. We have agency agreements between the firm and the seller. We have agency agreements between the firm and the buyer. Once you enter into this agency relationship with me, that's how you become this principal and client. Again, used interchangeably. Make sure you see both of those. The agent is the one that's authorized to represent the principal or the client. The agent is the firm. We, the individual in North Carolina, we are the brokers. The agent is the firm. They're the ones. The agent is the one that has permission to represent the interest of another, of that principal or client. I'm going to talk about subagency when we get there. I'm not going to spend too much time on it right now because I want to do a deeper dive when we get there. So for right now, when we see a subagent, when we see the prefix sub, that means under. So a subagent is an agent of an agent. So one example we have of a subagent, once the client hires the firm, all of the agents in the firm are a subagent of the firm. Remember, always remember, the relationship is with the client and the firm. Everybody else in the firm is a subagent. We're an agent of an agent. Now we're going to get deeper into subagency, Corey. So if that's your question, I'm going to ask that you hang on to it. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, so a buyer and a seller will never employ the same agency because
They
that,
might, and we're going to talk about that.
okay.
Oh, that can happen. That's where it gets real interesting. The customer or the third party is the one that doesn't hire you. I can take all the consumers and I can put all the consumers in two buckets. You either my client or you're my customer. We will talk more about that in a second. Everybody's got to have a role. I have to identify everybody in this transaction. So either you're my client or you're my customer. You get to be my client because you hire me or my firm. If you don't, you're my customer. Other states may offer a facilitator broker or a transactional broker. This is not allowed in North Carolina. In these types of transaction, both parties are customers. In a facilitator broker or a transactional broker relationship, nobody hires a firm. And in North Carolina, this isn't allowed. In North Carolina, for you and I to be involved in a transaction, somebody has to hire us. At least one party, if not both, has to hire us. So I say this because it's not the consumer's job to know my job. It's my job to know my job. That's a pretty fair statement, right? I don't expect all the consumers out there to know my job. And at one point in your career, you're going to get a call. Maybe you have a buddy that wants to buy a buddy's house. Two friends, your best friends, somebody wants to buy their house. Neither one of them want to hire you. You may want to find new friends, but neither one of them want to hire you. Nobody wants to enter into an agency relationship with you. And it's important that we know that you and I, as brokers, cannot assist in that transaction. In order for us to be involved, somebody has to hire us. At least one of the parties has to be a client. And people will ask, because they know I come with the pre-printed forms. I come with an offer to purchase and contract. Truth is, I'm a heck of a lot cheaper than an attorney. So they're going to come to you first. They got two choices. They either hire the attorney to do their paperwork, or one of them hires you. Understand this right now, you guys. Buyers and sellers are not required to hire an agent. People buy and sell real estate all day, every day without our assistance. If they're not using us, they got to get an attorney involved for the paperwork, the process, etc. So they could be saving money by hiring us. So again, just some definitions, easing in, just some definitions, making sure we have an understanding, basic understanding of these words mean as we progress. Let's talk more about this client and customer. The client is represented, the customer is unrepresented. If they hire you, they become your client and you represent them. I liken this to going to court. If you have to go stand in front of a judge, if you're represented, that means you have an attorney by your side. If you're unrepresented, you're still standing in front of the judge, aren't you? But now you're standing in front of that judge all alone. So the idea of being represented or unrepresented, really what I'm telling you, it's the difference of whether or not they hire you or not. They hire you by entering into an agency agreement. My mentor, when she teaches, or one of my mentors, when she teaches agency, she uses the idea for the client versus customer by using the example of an airplane. Let's say you are the pilot of the plane. You are the one responsible for getting this plane from point A to point B, i.e. the real estate transaction. When the client hires you, we're going to put them in first class. The other party, the customer in this transaction, is going to be back in coach. As the pilot, they're both on my plane. Yes? And I have a duty to get everybody from point A to point B safely. Don't we all arrive at point B at the same time? The difference is the level of service received in between. I hear it's really nice in first class. Maybe get a dinner, some champagne, a warm towel. What do we get back in coach? Like unsalted pretzels and a lukewarm Coca-Cola? It's a different class in first class, isn't it? It's a different level of service. So once they hire you, once they become your client, they're going to get that higher level of service. We're getting there. We will talk about what we owe the client. We will talk about what we owe the customer. Before we do that, though, I want to share some examples. In a real estate transaction, you may represent the seller. If, in this case, the seller is your client, that means the buyer is back in coach. Maybe the buyer has hired a different firm. Maybe the buyer's going it alone. The point is that the buyer didn't hire your firm. The seller did. Flip that coin. If the buyer hires the firm, that means the seller is the customer. Again, maybe the seller hired a different firm. Maybe you got two firms working together in the transaction. Maybe the seller is going it alone. The seller going it alone is the for sale by owner, or like we would like to call them, the FSBO, for sale by owner. So if you represent the seller, you got your seller in first class, your buyer's back in coach. If you represent the buyer, you got your buyer in first class, the seller's back in coach. Corey said, well, can't you represent both? Can't your firm represent both? Absolutely. If we represent both, now I got buyer and seller in first class. I have nobody in coach. We're going to talk about that, what that means and what that looks like. And other states may allow you to have both back in coach. Nobody hired you. Nobody's the client. That is not allowed in North Carolina. That's that transactional broker. I've said agency agreement several times now. Please write that down if you haven't yet. How do you hire me? How do you become my client? Because we enter into an agency agreement together. An agency agreement is the employment contract. It's the legally binding document that we have that proves that you hired me to represent you in this transaction. Yeah, Kayla. And then I'll get you Tank. Thank you.
So I know that it's not allowed in NC, but I just want to understand it because we're talking about it. The facilitator, transactional broker, is that, I'm picturing like a court-ordered attorney, like that kind of thing. Like you're just kind of thrown in there.
I
So
mean,
there's
maybe, but
like-
it could be more like the for sale by owner and the
Okay.
unrepresented buyer.
Okay.
So you have an unrepresented buyer that's your buddy. You have the seller, that's the FSBO, the for sale by owner. And again, that buddy may come to you and say, hey, I want to buy this FSBO down the street. Can you help me? And her answer is not until you hire me, not until you enter into that agency agreement. Because again, for us to be involved, somebody's got to hire us. Maybe it's one party, maybe it's both.
Okay.
I
Thank you.
agree completely, Corey, and please bear with me. We're going to talk about that. Yes, Tink, thank you.
Is there a different way that this part can be explained? Because I'm having trouble imagining that I'm representing one and the other is a customer. Why are they still a part of the equation? Or at
Sure,
least on
so-
my end?
No, so Tink, let's say I work for firm ABC and you work for firm XYZ. We work for two different firms. I have the listing, you bring the buyer. Could I just say I have the listing? So in that case, my seller would be my client, your buyer would be my customer. Your buyer would be your client, my seller would be, we're two firms coming together, we're cooperating together to make this transaction happen.
Okay,
Yeah.
but my top priority is still my seller, that's my client.
Always your client is number one. Yep. And we're getting ready to break down what we owe our clients and what we owe our customers. Again, you guys, I never have a golden ticket to lie. So I got to be truthful to Tink's client, my customer. I got to be truthful. And again, we'll break those down in just a second. Does that document lock the buyer in to only use you then? So our agency agreements are exclusive. There's a big word I'm going to start introducing you guys to. We're going to start introducing you to the word exclusive. Let me ask you guys something. If you're dating somebody exclusively, how many people should you be dating? You should just be dating one person. So if we have an exclusive agency agreement, what we're saying is the buyer can only date one firm. Now, exclusivity is a one-way street. The firm can date several buyers. None of us are going to make money if we can only have one buyer at a time, right? So it's just a one-way street. But yeah, that word exclusive means once you enter into this agency agreement with me, I am the only one that can assist you in this transaction. Principal and client, one and the same, and we use them interchangeably. So I suggest you write that down. Principal equals client. They're one and the same. And again, they're the one that hired us using those agency agreements. So let's talk first about the duty that we owe our client. Everybody with me? Your client, the one that hires you. And one way we can remember those duties that we owe our principal or our client is if we can remember OLCAR. Now we're going to talk about each of these. Before we get into these, I need you guys to understand something right now. Agency, being hired by a buyer or seller, representing a client or a principal, is not about you. It is about them. And it's about best representing them in this transaction. If I owe you OLCAR, I'm saying it is all about you, client. It is all about you, principal. So let's talk about OLCAR. The O in OLCAR is obedience. I am to act in good faith at all times. I'm going to obey my principal's lawful instructions. That word is so important. Lawful instructions. When we talk about lawful instructions, no client can make me break rules and laws. Police power can't make me go out and commit a crime. I'm also referring to license law and commission rule. We have to follow license law, commission rule at all times. Again, you guys, it's not the consumer's job to know my job. They may ask me to do something, not trying to trick me, not trying to get me in trouble, but because they don't know where my parameters are. They don't know what I'm capable of. So this is what we're doing in this class. We're teaching you these parameters. We're teaching you these laws and rules so you can make sure you're following your client's lawful instructions. Y'all write that down, highlight it, and underline it. We follow their lawful instructions. Remember what we've been saying up to this point? Another big part of my job is teaching you guys to stay in your lane, right? Making sure you don't switch over to somebody else's lane. Another piece of staying in your lane is making sure that you follow the laws and the rules. Let me ask you guys a question. If you get on, you pop on the interstate tomorrow, and let's say the speed limit on the interstate is 70. How fast are you going? Somebody's going 80. Truthfully, how fast are you going? 80. Too fast. I appreciate that. You're going faster than 70 is what I'm hearing. Can you go over the speed limit? Can you? Super easy, isn't it? What's going to happen should you get pulled over? You're going to get caught for breaking the laws. You're going to get in trouble. So not only are we teaching you guys to stay in your lane, we're also teaching you the speed limit. Can you go beyond license, law, and commission rule? Yes. In a lot of cases, it's really easy to do. But you're going to face the consequences. And we'll talk about those consequences in this unit as well. Corey, that's another one. I don't know. I just like to keep things as simple as I can. Life just gets too hard and complicated sometimes, right? So I just like to keep it as simple as I can. And one of my super simple philosophies is just because you can doesn't mean that you should. Can you go faster than 70? Yes. Does that mean that you should? I share with you guys, I got a new car last year. It's a lot of fun, still is. I love it a whole lot. And it's got something in it called a turbo. And I don't really know what that means, except that it's really easy to go really fast. You don't feel like you're going 90. Does that make it okay? Because it's a smooth ride and it takes off. It does. Oh, she's a lot of fun. I don't know how I haven't gotten a ticket yet. I'll be honest. I should have, because it's so easy. Does that make it okay? Is that going to be my excuse when the cop pulls me over? Like, oh, she's got a turbo, officer. It's just because you can doesn't mean that you should. 23 Sonata. It's so nice. I love it. Love it, love it, love it. So we're obedient. We follow our clients' lawful instructions. Everybody have that highlighted, written down, underlined, everything. This is what we're doing, you guys. We're teaching you to stay in your lane, and we're teaching you the speed limit. The L in old car is loyalty. I am loyal to the one that hired me. I'm going to put their interest above all others. Sometimes that means even my own. We need to be sensitive to conflicts of interest. One example of a conflict of interest, and we're going to talk about several, again, we're just easing you in. One example of a conflict of interest. I can list as a broker, I can list a property that I own. I can wear two hats. I can be the seller and the listing agent. I cannot represent the buyer in that transaction. Because Old Car says I should have the buyer's best interest in mind. But let's face it, if my name's on the deed, whose best interest do I actually have? Mine. All day long. Do we see the conflict of interest? Now, somebody else in the firm can work with the buyer, full disclosure. Somebody else in the firm can work with the buyer. But an example of a conflict of interest is that I can't. If my name is on that deed, I cannot represent the buyer. Does everybody bob your head up and down? Do we see that conflict of interest? Do we see how that can be very challenging? So again, we're introducing you. We got several others that we're going to talk about. That's right, the one that makes me money. And when I'm selling this house, where's the money coming from? The sale of the house. That's my proceeds. The D in Old Car is disclosure. Disclose, disclose, disclose. Guys, we don't have secrets. Once we learn about something, maybe it affects your seller's decision, maybe it affects your buyer's decision. We're going to talk about, when we get to 9 and 10, we're going to talk about offers and counter offers and negotiating and that kind of thing. If we know of anything that can influence our client's decision, we have a duty to disclose that information. No secrets. You may want to write that down. No secrets. That's part of that fiduciary. When they hire me, they should be able to trust but I'm not going to keep secrets from them. If it's relevant to this transaction, if it'll affect their decision making. We're working our way up to material facts. We'll probably get, I know we'll get into this discussion tonight. We've danced all around it. So we'll get into the official material facts discussion. Telling you to inform your clients, telling you to disclose isn't enough. Let's take just a few minutes and break this down. What if you're the listing agent? Well, as the listing agent, I have a duty to disclose all offers to my sellers. This is actually a commission rule. We have to give all offers to our sellers. All. Remember those absolute words we saw on day one? Is there any exception to the word all? Every single one. But what if, I hear you, what if it's an insultingly low offer that's just going to make your seller mad? Can't I just reject it on their behalf? No, we have a duty to disclose all offers. I had a seller a couple years ago. He said, I cannot accept anything under X amount. Perfect. We got it listed, went on the market, an offer came in under X amount. What do y'all think I did? I presented it to him and I told him, first words out of my mouth were, this is under X amount, but I have a duty to disclose this with you. What do you want to do? And he said, Julie, I can't do it. I said, great. He rejected it, not me. So everybody hear the difference there. Remember, I'm a fact finder. Guys, what if his financial situation changed the night before and he had to get rid of that house no matter what? And he found out I rejected that offer on his behalf. He just hadn't had a chance to tell me that yet. Is that how you old car? Is that how you offer that fiduciary? Please shake your head no, because we have that duty to disclose all offers to our sellers. As a listing agent, if you learn that the buyer can offer a higher price, maybe they're willing to go higher than what they're offering, I have a duty to share that with my seller. This starts affecting negotiating powers. As the listing agent, if you learn that the buyer intends to purchase the property and then turn around and sell it for a profit, maybe there's a proposed zoning amendment on the table. And if that zoning amendment passes, it's going to greatly increase the values of the property. Might that affect the seller's decision to sell now? So once we learn, once we know about something, again, you guys, as a listing agent, I don't have any secrets from my seller. So once we learn about profit or the buyer's intentions, we have a duty to disclose, to share with them. When you're working with a buyer, what are we disclosing? Examples of things we're working with the buyer. Once we learn about any deficiencies of the property, and again, I really don't care where you learn about it. Once we learn about deficiencies about the property, I got a duty to share that with my buyer. Maybe the listing agent shares something with me. Maybe there is information just made available to brokers, not made available to the public. That's one way we can communicate with each other in our listing service. Maybe your buyer gets a home inspection and he doesn't see something on the home inspection report, for example. I don't care how you learn about a deficiency about the property. Anything we learn, we're going to share that with our buyer. Maybe it's the neighbor that shares something. Now, I'm not going to take the neighbor at her word or his word, but if the neighbor tells us something, isn't that going to raise my little red flag to prompt us to investigate, to prompt us to find out more? I tell you, as a buyer's agent, nothing makes me more nervous than the neighbor showing up. Yoo-hoo! How are you guys doing today? I'm like, oh, Lord, what's getting ready to come out of her mouth next? Just because the neighbor says it doesn't mean it's true, but didn't that raise my little red flag and cause me to ask questions, cause me to investigate, cause me to help my buyer learn if what they're saying, what the neighbor says is true. The neighbors know so much. Also, as a buyer's agent, anything that could affect the property's value or desirability. Maybe you learn why the seller's selling. Maybe it's a high days on market. Days on market tells me how many days it's active before it goes under contract. And again, we get that all in our listing service, but it tells me how many days on market, how many days is it active. And as the market adjusts, so does the days on market. Remember, we need to be experts of our market. We need to be familiar with the average days on market. So 2 years ago, the average days on market was like 3. Today, we're up to like 28. I mean, we're doing better. We get back into a buyer's market, the average days on market could be 5 months, 6 months, right? So it just depends on the market. So if your buyer's interested in a property that has a higher days on market than average, isn't that something that they deserve to know? Because that could affect what they want to offer. Again, I'm not telling them. I'm providing them the facts so they can make an informed decision. Questions on old: obedience, loyalty, and disclosure. Let's talk about car. The C in car, yeah. Yeah, Benjamin, did you have a question?
Yes. Yeah. Quick question. Material facts is what we just covered, right? With disclosures.
No, we're dancing all around material facts. We're getting ready to do a deep dive on it.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
I had to read.
Oh yeah.
All right.
You're
Thank
going to be
you. I had to
materially
read.
fact out by the time I get done with you, so don't worry.
All right. Thank you.
Sure. So the old obedience, loyalty, disclosure are C in cars confidentiality. I cannot disclose information about my principal about this transaction. That's the key, you guys, about this transaction without their, and this is important, written permission. Remind me what we document? Everything. So if your client gives you permission to disclose something that could affect their negotiating power, something that could affect what they're going to offer, what they're going to accept. For example, I had sellers a couple years ago, different sellers, and they started as FSBOs. They went for sale by owner, and they probably did it 4 or 5 months before they got frustrated, and then I came into the picture. So I got their property listed, and we were on the market for like 2 weeks, and this was a different market. This was back in the day pre-pandemic, before this crazy seller's market. So we were on the market for like 2 weeks, which we hadn't even hit our average days on market. We were nowhere near it yet. 2 weeks on the market, and she calls me frustrated. But remember what I just said. She had gone for sale by owner for 4 or 5 months before I got in the picture. So we were in 2 different mindsets, weren't we? I was just getting started. She had been at this for some time already. So she calls me frustrated, and she was like, Julie, we got to sell this house. And I'm like, okay. And she said, can you put super highly motivated seller in the listing service? I said, no, I'm not going to put that. Let's talk this through. I will put motivated seller. I'm not going to put super highly, but I will put motivated seller once I get your written permission. Let's talk about what the consumer sees. Let's face it, you guys, all sellers are motivated. Yes, they got a for sale sign in their front yard. You may not want to know, you may not know why they're selling, but they're motivated for some reason to sell. What are you telling buyers when you advertise that they are motivated sellers?
That they'll take a lower price.
That they'll take a lower price than what we're asking. We're telling buyers bring me something. Now, if I put super highly motivated, what I'm saying is bring me junk and we'll look at it, right? Which is why I wouldn't do all that. But in order to advertise, in order to tell the world that my seller was motivated, I had to get her written permission. Could that affect her negotiating power? As Rebecca just said, buyers see I can get in under asking price. So whenever we're going to disclose certain confidential information, we need their written permission. Here's the breakdown with confidentiality. I tell my client everything about my customer. I tell the customer nothing about my client without their written permission. That's that fiduciary. They've got to trust that I'm not running all over town blabbing. This is why my seller's selling. This is what my seller would be willing to offer. This is how low they're willing to go. They've got to trust that I'm not running around blabbing their secrets about this transaction. We tell our clients everything about our customer. We tell our customer nothing about our client without their written permission. This is a huge difference in first class versus coach. So I owe my client confidentiality. The A in OCAR is accounting. I'm going to account for all funds received from or on behalf of my principal. At some point in the transaction, you're probably going to have somebody else's money in your hand. And the A in OCAR says, I have a duty to make sure that I'm accountable for that. I have a duty, by the way, if it's in my hand, it's for purposes of delivering. I'm playing delivery boy. I'm getting it from seller to buyer or point A to point B, whatever. We'll talk about those monies when we look at our contract. But if it's in my hand, it's because I'm delivering it. I'm not holding it. And if it's in your hand, my suggestion is that you get it to where it needs to go. Because when it's in your hand, guess who is totally responsible for that money should something happen to it? 100% you. So my suggestion is once you do get somebody else's money in your hand, get it to where it needs to go. We also have a duty to maintain accurate records. There's another commission rule that says we keep all records for 3 years from the conclusion of the transaction. We're going to talk more about that, but we maintain accurate records. Not only do we maintain them, but we keep them for minimum of 3 years from the conclusion of the transaction. Also under accounting, I owe it to my seller client to make sure that their final numbers, what they're going to get when they sell this home, is accurate. I owe it to my buyer to help them verify what they have to pay is accurate. That's the fun math we're going to do in Unit 21. We're going to talk about sellers' debits and credits so we can determine what your seller's going to get when they sell. We're going to talk about buyers' debits and credits so we can help our buyers verify what they have to bring is accurate. That's under the accounting. Their money is important to them, yes? OCAR says, then it is important to me as well. I'm helping them account for their funds. Not to leave anybody in suspense, but I'm going to hold the R until after break because the R is going to take us a minute. So we got OLDCA, and then I'll leave you in suspense for a second. So let's go ahead and take our break. We come back, we'll go through that R in OCAR. Come back. So cameras are on. Say cheese or money, whichever one makes you happier. You can buy a lot of cheese with money, can't you? So maybe they, most of you like money better than cheese. Again, money buys cheese. So, right, we can have both best of both worlds with that, right? All right. So we talked about obedience. We talked about loyalty. We talked about disclosure. We talked about confidentiality. We talked about accounting. By the way, your book, I hope as you guys are looking ahead at your books, these, like page 141, you have an example. Also scattered throughout your book, you have in practice. I think those kind of help, pull it together for you guys. I have taken attendance, so if you're just coming back, please let me know. Make sure you do. But I think sometimes these can kind of help give you these real world scenarios that help make the connection. So the example on 141 talks about something called an earnest money deposit. We're going to talk about earnest money when we get to unit 10. We're also going to talk about where earnest money belongs. And it belongs in something called a trust account. So rest assured, these conversations are coming. We're just easing you in here. So the A in old car is accounting. The last one, then the R, this is our reasonable skill, care, and diligence. This is the commission rule that says, just because you can doesn't mean that you should. Not only do I need you guys to stay in your lane, I also need you to maintain the speed limit. And the commission has set the speed limit. So let's talk about this reasonable skill, care, and diligence. Your North Carolina real estate license allows you to engage in brokerage activity of any type, residential sales, commercial, property management, agricultural, industrial. There are no separate license. There's a license in North Carolina. And we can engage in brokerage activity anywhere across the state as long as the property is located in the state of North Carolina. Not about the people, is it? It's about where the property is located. Reasonable skill, care, and diligence says just because you can brokerage any deal in the state of North Carolina, is it reasonable that you should? Well, I can't really answer that for you. If you're going to go outside of your comfort zone, if you're going to go brokerage a deal in an area in North Carolina that you're not familiar, you don't know the zoning, you don't know DOT, you don't know the neighborhoods, you don't know school boards, but yet your buddy wants to buy a house in, for example, Wilmington. Reasonable skill, care, and diligence says maybe what's best for your buddy is that you refer them to an agent in Wilmington. You refer them to somebody in Wilmington that knows the market. Remember, we said we need to be experts of our market. So you can practice anywhere in the state of North Carolina. Reasonable skill, care, and diligence says proceed with caution. If you're going to go outside of your comfort zone, you need to be willing to learn the market. Let's bring this closer to home. I'm a residential agent. That's all I've ever done in my career is residential. I've heard about commercial. I actually got to do admin work for commercial for a while. That's my experience with commercial. I don't know a whole lot about commercial sales. What I do know is commercial is a totally different beast than residential. Just operates differently. If I have somebody that reaches out to me and wants to purchase a commercial property, can I help that is located in North Carolina? Can I help them? Can I with my brokerage license? Yeah, Yeah, because my license says I can engage in any type of brokerage activity as long as the property is located in the state of North Carolina. However, would that be in their best interest? I don't know nothing about commercial. I don't know how it works. I don't know the paperwork. I'm not familiar with it. It might be in their best interest that I refer them to a commercial agent. If I do agree to take on that transaction, that business, then I got to be willing to learn the commercial game. I got to be willing how to best suit them in that market. So reasonable skill, care, and diligence is the question you need to be asking yourself on the regular. Could I make more money if I helped them than if I referred them? Absolutely. But remember what we said at the start of this unit. Agency is not about you. Agency is about what's best for them. And that's what reasonable skill, care, and diligence says. Again, we break this down a little bit further. If you're working with the seller, at some point, the seller is going to ask you when you're getting ready to list their home for sale, the seller is going to ask you, what should we put it on the market for? What should we list it for? Reasonable skill, care, and diligence says, I'm going to look at some comps. I'm going to look at some numbers. I'm going to look at some reports to come up with a professional, educated number. I'm not just going to blurt a number out. I'm not just going to say, well, the guy down the street listed it for this, so let's try that. We're going to talk about those comps and how we can professionally answer that question. That's coming in Unit 17. Reasonable skill, care, and diligence owed to the seller. Any facts about the buyer that would aid in the seller's making decision. Again, we don't have secrets. Properly advertising the property. You know, it's not just about putting the property in the listing service and letting the listing service transfer it out to all the other websites. It's properly advertising it. Make sure that we have accurate information in the listing service, verifying the information we put in. And we owe it to our sellers to help them understand when they do get an offer, what does this mean? Guys, brace yourself. In Unit 10, I'm going to introduce you to the 17-page offer to purchase and contract. 17-page offer to purchase and contract. The seller is going to look at that offer and go, I have no idea what half this stuff means. And guess what, you guys? It's our job. Reasonable skill, care, and diligence says that we help them understand. Sellers think they care about two things. How much and when? How much are they offering and when do they want to close? You and I need to help them understand that there's a lot more involved in that offer than those two things. You're working with the buyer. We can almost flip these coins here. How much should I offer? Once the buyer finds the one, the dream home that they have been looking for their entire search, they walk in the front door and they go, this is it. Let's write it up. And what's the first question out of their mouths going to be? How much should I offer? Again, reasonable skill, care, and diligence says I'm not just going to blurt a number out there. I'm going to do some research. I'm going to look at some comps. I'm going to look at some numbers to help them arrive to that decision. Don't just assume that it's listed appropriately, that the list price is appropriate. Help them see what they should offer. Locating and viewing suitable properties. You know, sit down with the buyer, spend time with them. I'm old school, y'all. I give my buyers a piece of paper. I tell them to draw a line down the middle of it. One side is your wants, another side is your needs. There are two different things going on there, aren't there? Be prepared for that list to change. Their wants and needs may change once they get out there and actually start looking at properties. So helping them see things that could be suitable, helping them find those. They may not be in the listing service. They might be a for sale by owner, for example. Financing, making sure they can afford to buy their dream home. We're going to talk about financing. We're going to talk about something called a pre-approval or a pre-qualification when we get to units 14 and 15. We want our buyers to talk to a lender before I take them out and start showing them property. Why are you wasting your time when you don't know what they can afford? Why are you wasting their time when we don't know what they can afford. So we're going to practice reasonable skill, care, and diligence to offer them financing. And then we're going to present offers on behalf of the buyer. I'm going to help them determine the terms that they want to offer on those 17 pages. I'm going to help their offer be competitive. I'm going to help them bring out what they consider as their best offer. And then I'm going to present that offer on their behalf because they are my client and they get that duty of me presenting the offer like it's the best daggum offer I've ever seen, because that's what my client is willing to offer. Y'all, I can't tell you how many times as a listing agent, I've had buyer's agents call me and say, this is all my buyer's willing to offer. I know your seller's not going to accept it, but I have to send it anyway. So just let us know what you have to say. Is that how you represent your buyers? Is that how you old car? Is that what you think is best for them? Like I said, you present that offer like it's the best daggum offer you've ever presented because it is your buyer's offer. Absolutely, Corey. That happened 2 years ago. We had buyers coming in at 50,000, 75,000 or more than asking price. But guess what? That was their decision. Can they ask more than what I offer, more than what I suggest? Yeah, but it's my job to help them come up with that. What's a reasonable offer price? What's in this market? I can't tell them what to do, but I can provide them with the facts and the information for them to come to that decision. Always remember, I do not have a license to boss anybody around or make anybody do anything. I have a license to help them in this transaction. So I provide the facts for them to make that informed decision. When we're talking about reasonable skill, care, and diligence, to both buyers and sellers, like we've been saying, we need to be the experts of our market, know what's going on, not only in the area or areas you want to work within the state of North Carolina. If you want to take on the entire state, you got a lot to learn, but also what's going on in the market. Are we in a seller's market? Are we in a buyer's market? How's the market adjusting? What's happening with interest rates? That is the market. So staying in touch, staying informed, being familiar with zoning, roads, DOT, like I said, school boards. If the school board makes a big announcement that they're redrawing the lines, could that affect future homeowners in that area? Yeah, and some may not want to buy until we know what those lines are going to look like, for example. So you need to stay current so you can help educate them and they can make these informed decisions. This is your speed limit. So according to the Real Estate Commission, what happens if you speed? What happens when you go 90 in that 70? You could be guilty of negligence or misconduct. You could be held liable to your principal for any monetary damages. You could forfeit your firm's compensation. If you violate license law and commission rule, LL and CR, license law and commission rule. You could face disciplinary action by the Real Estate Commission. We will talk about that. Anybody, you can sue anybody for anything. So could the buyer or seller sue you after the transaction? Yeah, how far are they going to get? I don't know. I can't answer that. I'll tell you one way, when you do have to go stand in front of a judge or the Real Estate Commission, go with your documentation because that's all you got. Remind me what we document? Everything. What happens when you go stand in front of a judge and say, I didn't do that. He said this and she said that. The judge is going to say, first off, they're going to say, show me your documentation. Well, I don't have it. The judge is going to say, get out of here. I don't have time for you. So document everything because should it go down, that's what you have. Again, more on that disciplinary action. I can't stop anybody from suing you guys. I can't stop anybody from filing a complaint. What I can do is help you get out of it by having you have your documentation. That's the only leg you have to stand on. So let's look at an example together, similar to what we were just talking about. Let's talk about Colin. He's a buyer's agent. He gets a request from his buyer to see a property that is 200 miles away. It's 200 miles outside of the area that he normally works. The question is, shake your head, yes or no. Can Colin show this buyer this property, assuming it's in North Carolina? Can he? Yes. Should he? That's up to Colin. If Colin's willing to go 200 miles every time that buyer wants to see the property, when the home inspector comes, if the buyer wants to go in and see paint samples, that's a question that Colin has to ask himself. Am I willing to do the work 200 miles away? Am I willing to learn that area, that market, to best assist my buyer and drive back and forth all those times? Colin can't look at his buyer and say, I'm sorry, I can't meet you for paint samples because it's too far away. That's not reasonable skill, care, and diligence. So we can't answer that question. The only question we can answer is, can he? Yes. It's up to Colin to decide if he's willing to do that work 200 miles away. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? And what was it last year? Gas prices skyrocketed. Couldn't that have made a difference as well? I mean, you got to think about it all. If Colin's not willing to do that work, then his best bet is going to be to refer it to an agent in that market and take a referral fee. A referral fee is better than a lawsuit. A referral fee is better than disciplinary action. It is better than nothing at all. So you guys have this decision to make. What market do you want to work? What market do you want to be the expert of? And that is what reasonable skill, care, and diligence. Question comes in, would I take this job? No, I personally would not, because I don't have that kind of time. That's the other thing Colin needs to ask himself, you know? So there's this, you got to ask, would I do it? No, I'd refer it, take the referral fee, and know that my buyer is best represented by this agent, wherever that is. That's me, though. You guys need to make that decision for yourself. I don't want any of you to come back and say, my pre-licensing instructor told me no. No, 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 no. Your pre-licensing instructor is telling you you've got a decision to make. That's what reasonable skill, care, and diligence says. Questions about Old Car? Anything on Old Car? Let me see your mouths move. Who do we owe Old Car to? Who gets Old Car? The client, the one that hires you. How do they hire you? Through an agency agreement. If you have an agency agreement, that's part of what we're saying. That's part of that fiduciary, is that they're going to get Old Car. They get first class treatment. So what about these customers? What about these customers back in Coach? They're still in my plane. So I don't not owe them anything. They just don't get that first class service. My customers, the ones that don't hire me, get honesty, fairness, and the disclosure of material facts. We owe the disclosure of material facts to everybody. I don't care if you're my client or you're my customer. We always have a duty to disclose material facts. I'm about 2 slides away from material facts, so bear with me. We always have a duty to disclose material facts to everybody. Are you my client? Are you my customer? Makes no difference. There's another absolute word right there, right? Always. Does that mean that there's a time that I don't disclose material facts? We always, can I word that another way? We never have a reason not to disclose material facts. How about that? Never have a reason not. We always owe material facts. You know, the customers, the consumers, the ones that don't hire us, just as kind of a side note here, there's something called puffing. Puffing is something we see in our advertising. If you guys, is anybody in the habit of looking at homes for sale on your favorite website? You just sit and scroll and scroll and scroll endlessly. It's like Instagram, right? It's just nonstop, on and on and on. You guys ever read those remarks, read the word descriptions of the properties? We like to use a lot of nice adjectives to help paint a picture of the property, right? You need to be very, very careful that your adjectives are puffing, they're your exaggerated opinion, and they don't cross that fine line of a flat out lie. Nobody ever has a golden ticket to lie. So make sure if you're using those fancy adjectives to help paint the picture, that you're not misrepresenting the property. You're not lying about it. So let's say you're down at the coast, lucky duck, and you get this listing of this house right here. It's right across the street from a vacant lot, right? So when you walk out on the front porch, there's a really good chance that you're going to see the ocean. You can say ocean view. You can say front street property. I would not say ocean property, because what if somebody comes and builds right here? So you need to be careful about how you represent that. And you may want to paint the picture. Walk out on your front porch and look at the ocean until somebody builds, and now you can't see it unless you walk across the street. Does that make sense? So just be very, very careful that your puffing is just your exaggerated opinion. You know, I could say best house on the block. That's puffing. I shouldn't say only house on the block unless it is. So, any questions so far? Somebody says, is agency agreement done for referrals? No, agency agreements are only what we use to hire me. If we're going to do a referral, we actually have a referral agreement. So we can use it's called an agent to agent referral. Now, the agent I'm referring that buyer to would enter into an agency agreement with them, but I'm just referring them. Pretty much with referrals, all you're doing is saying, you know, Bob, this is Linda, Linda, this is Bob. And then you're letting the two go on. Did I hear unmute? Does somebody have a question? Let me go back. So let's do this. Why don't you guys set your chats to private, or just me? Also in Unit 7, I've kind of started interjecting Q&As, just kind of checkpoints to see how we're doing. Everybody's chat set to private. The reason I ask for private is because I don't want you to give the answer away. If everybody was chatting, some people say, oh yeah, my answer is A too. No, no, no. I want your genuine answer. So it's just between me and you. Everybody set? Tell me in a private chat, A, B, C, or D. Lynn? Y'all do my heart good. That was 100%. Agency isn't about you. Agency is not about, well, how much am I going to make in this transaction versus this transaction? Understand this right now, you guys. When they hire me, I owe them old car. Price point doesn't matter. I owe old car to the buyer that wants to buy a $5,000 vacant lot. I owe old car to the seller that has $1 million property. Price point in agency and old car, how much you're going to make doesn't matter. What matters is that they hired me, they trusted that I had their best interest in mind, that fiduciary. I'll get you paid. Never worry about that. As long as you're properly creating agency, you're following old car and licensed law and commission rule, we'll get you paid. But before I get you paid, we got to do the right things first. Is this making sense? Questions so far? Clients get old car, customers get honesty, fairness, and disclosure material facts. You'll hear me rattle those off a few more times. So before I flip the slide, we're going to talk about material facts, but before I flip the slide, I just want to take a step back. We talk about this idea of material facts. The definition of material facts is very broad and, to be honest, not helpful at all. So we're going to make it helpful in just a second. The definition of material facts, the broad definition, is a fact that a reasonable person would recognize as relevant when they're making a decision. Could you consider something relevant that I don't? Could there be something important to you? Isn't that subjective as all get out? So what the commission did, they're very helpful. And they took this very broad definition and they honed in on specifics. Specifically, the real estate commission says a material fact is a fact about the property itself. What are some issues with the physical characteristics of the property? Are there structural issues? Does the roof leak? Major electrical or plumbing issues? Termite damage. Those little buggers can do some damage. If you were buying a house, would you consider that relevant? If there were facts, if there were issues about the property itself? Roofs are not cheap. Structural? Now we're talking some big money. Is that something you would want to know about a property when you were buying it? You got to buy this house, and right out the bat, you got to put a new roof on it, deal with the structural and the termite issues. Is that relevant? Yes. Anything relevant about the property itself is defined as material fact. By the way, I'm on the top of page 143. The commission says material facts are facts relating directly to the property, not necessarily about the property, but relating to the property. That proposed zoning amendment. Right now, it's just zone residential. There's an proposal on the table to change it to residential and commercial. You could have a Dollar General next door next year. Is that something that's relevant to you if that zoning gets approved? Redrawing the school lines. DOT wants to widen the road or add a loop. Again, it's not on the property, but it somehow directly affects the property. Facts relating directly to the ability of the agent's principal to complete the transaction. This is the one that kind of makes us stop and think for a second. Remember I just told you you owe that client confidentiality? Well, now I'm telling you, we got a material fact to disclose if you find out that your client, your principal, cannot complete the transaction. This is the exception to confidentiality because this directly impacts the other side. If you find out your buyer's not going to get loan approval, their loan is going to get denied, doesn't that directly impact the seller? Don't they have a right to know that? Absolutely. What if you find out your seller is going to go into foreclosure before we can close, before the transaction closes? Which means if we go into foreclosure, the bank's taking the property back and it's no longer the seller's to sell. Doesn't that directly impact the buyer? So the reason that it's material, once we learn about our principal's inability to complete the transaction, that is something that we have to disclose to the other side because it affects them. And this fourth one, if it's important to my buyer, then it's important to me. If it's important to my seller, then it's important to me. This fourth one is a material fact to me. Something that came up in our continuing education classes a couple years ago, revolving around material facts. What if you have a buyer that shares with you that they have severe allergies to dogs and they can't live in a home where dogs have lived in it? Do you now have something of importance to that party? Do you now have a material fact? As their agent, don't you have a duty to reach out to the listing agent before the showing, before you waste your time, and say, your sellers have dogs, my buyers have severe allergies. If it's important to them, then we now have a duty to make sure that dogs never live there. Another one I heard was somebody ever smoked in the home. Some people may say, I have, respiratory issues and I can't live in a property where somebody smoked. Don't you now have a material fact on your hand? Let's back this up a little bit. I had buyers once. She had large dining room furniture. Her dining room table was set for service of 10, 4 on each side, 2 at the end. She had a credenza and a china cabinet. She said, Julie, I need a dining room big enough to hold my dining room furniture. Was that important to her? So guess what? It became important to me. Never look at a buyer and say, oh, whatever, you can put the credenza in the hall, it'll be fine. If it's important enough for them to mention it, then it is important enough for me to make sure that we can fit our dining room furniture in there. Once they share something of specific importance, and never look at a buyer or seller and say, oh, you don't have to worry about that. That'll be all right. No, that's not how you old car, you guys. Once they share something with you. Now, can I help them if they don't share with me? I only know what I know, right? So this is why we suggest like buyer consultations, spending time with your sellers, spending time with your buyers, flat out asking them what's important to you, because that's going to help me make sure that their end use is met. Make sure that I can make sure that her dining room table, her dining room furniture will fit in the dining room. Sometimes in the listing services, you may see room dimensions listed. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. It's not a required field. Those listings that gave us the room dimensions, we saved ourselves times seeing properties because we could look at the room dimensions and tell that it wasn't big enough. Sometimes we walked into a house and turned around and walked right back out because that dining room wasn't big enough. It was important to her. Am I going to argue with her about that? She liked her dining room furniture. Awesome. It now becomes my responsibility to find her a dining room that can hit that furniture, hold that furniture. We're going to talk again. We're just introducing you, and I got some things I'd like you guys to look at this weekend. So we'll talk about that in a minute as well. Before we move
I think
slides.
Fran Smith has a question.
I'm sorry.
I think Mr. Smith had a question.
Oh, thank
Oh,
you.
I appreciate you, man. No, I was just wondering, so like as far as like going to like an open house or something like that, are we supposed to, or let's say we're at the open house, are we supposed to disclose any of this information, or this like they're like technically customers, or
So we can, how we disclose this information doesn't matter. The platform doesn't matter. So if you're hosting an open house and a buyer comes in and they say, wow, I'm kind of interested about this. We got other disclosure laws that I'm talking about next week. But I should be able to say, awesome, I'm glad you're interested. You should know the roof is 30 years old and it's going to need to be replaced soon. Right. So just because you come into my open house doesn't mean I'm going to start pointing out all the defects, right? Because maybe you're just out kicking tires. Maybe you just go out open housing for fun. But usually once we start getting these serious inquiries, then we want to make sure they know, like I said, the roof's 30 years old. You're probably going to have to replace it soon. Is that going to affect what they offer? Is that what they're going to affect what they consider? Because roofs aren't cheap, right? So it's something that they need to take into consideration. So to answer your question, Tyrone, I don't have to just, welcome to my open house, the roof is 30 years old, right? I don't have to blurt it all out right away. But if they start showing interest, if their agent calls me on Monday and says, hey, my guys came to your open house and they're thinking about it. And again, delivery doesn't matter. Do I, put it in my listing service? Do I email them? Do I text them? Do I pick up the phone and call them? Delivery doesn't matter. The fact is that we get it out there. So before I flip slides, I want you guys to look. I'm on page 143. And right under those 4 bullet points, there's a paragraph there. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but it's worth going over briefly. There are some things, some issues that the North Carolina Real Estate Commission has deemed automatic material facts. What I mean by that is, if you ever come across one of these things, you don't need to stand there and ask, is this worth disclosing? Is this something that somebody would consider relevant? If we come across these things, then it's automatically a material fact. First one we have there is EIFS, otherwise known as synthetic stucco. Stucco is exterior siding. It's real rough looking. It almost looks like concrete. I tend to think of stucco on like Spanish style homes. It looks like concrete. Synthetic then is fake stucco. And the problem with that is it allows moisture to get back there and get behind it and get trapped. And moisture trapped in the property is not good. We're dealing with mold, mildew, soft rotted wood, So if it's ever been clad in synthetic stucco, even if it's been replaced, it will always remain a material fact on the property. If it has leaking polybutylene pipes are just cheap pipes. They're white plastic and they have blue or red writing on them. If they've ever leaked, they will forever be a material fact. Again, sometimes we got to ask the seller some hard questions, right? We're down in the crawl space, we look up and the pipes are nice and shiny and new. Maybe that throws our little red flag to go, oh yeah, we had pipes last year that leaked and we had to replace the whole plumbing. What kind of pipes were they? So sometimes we're looking for those little red flags. The key there is that they have leaked. The joke is that if they haven't leaked yet, don't worry, they will. But the key here, it becomes that automatic material fact when they leak. And then the other one there is that the property was ever a meth home where they cook meth. Meth absorbs into the walls, the carpets, the floors. It's, doesn't get out easily. Now, you guys go in panic mode on me. You'll have to ask sellers if they ever cook meth in this house. No, you don't. But you need to be on alert, your little red flags, right? What if the sellers had tenants in place for the last 10 years and they didn't know what was going on? And they tell you, I had to kick my tenants out because I caught them cooking meth in here, right? Now we know. I don't ask a lot of questions because the less I know, sometimes the better off I am. I had a pre-licensing student, I think it was last year, tell us that if you walk into a home and it smells like a nail salon, your little red flag needs to go up. I don't ask him how he knew that, but if you basically smell it, then your little red flag. Again, you guys, I'm not saying you need to ask us, do you ever cook meth? No, but if you find out, you don't have to ask yourself, do I have to disclose that? The answer is yes. Once you find out it's a meth home, then we have to disclose that. Material facts. We always have a duty to discover and disclose all material facts. Question comes in, is there a general list of questions that we do have to ask your firm? Remember, your firm's going to give you checklists. They're going to go over that. Yep. Please, please. My duty is to discover and disclose, not diagnose. When you see an issue with the property, if you see a stain on the ceiling, I say, hey, look, there's a stain. We need to get a roofer or a plumber out here to determine what caused that. Do not look at that stain and be like, ooh, stain. Clearly that's from a leaking roof or a boot that's not sealed. Are you a roofer? Are you a plumber? If you are, humor me. But we typically, my job is to discover and disclose, not diagnose. We're looking for those little red flags so we can look at our buyers and say, stain on the ceiling, we need to get somebody else in here to investigate. We need to get the roofer to come in. It's part of your process, buyer. We are discovering and disclosing. Discovering means I'm paying attention to my little red flags. I'm not hiding my head in the sand and say, whoop, I didn't see a stain on the ceiling. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you hear it, once you smell it, once you know it, you can't unknow it. We are going to discover and disclose any of this information that might affect the principal's decision. Put yourself in that party's shoes. If you were out buying a house, would you consider it relevant that the roof was 30 years old and there's stains on the ceiling? Would you consider that relevant? Absolutely. Everybody shake your head. Yes, absolutely. So why not put yourself in those buyers and sellers' shoes? And guys, remember, we always have a duty to disclose material facts. Whether you're talking to a client or a customer. Now let's put this out here. Remember caveat emptor? What does the seller have to disclose? Nothing, except lead-based paint. What am I telling you we have to disclose? Everything. Do we see a conflict? You better believe it. Remember, we follow our clients' lawful instructions. So when the seller says the roof is 30 years old and it leaks every time it rains hard, shh, don't tell anybody. Is that an instruction I can follow? No, we follow their lawful. So what do? Are we out to manipulate and trick our sellers? Of course not. We got to set the expectations up front. We have to have these conversations very early on. When you first meet with the seller, you go to that listing appointment. We're going to talk about the listing appointment more in Unit 8. But you go to that listing appointment, guys, the sellers are proud. I mean, this is their home and they're proud. And one of the first things they're going to want to do is give you the grand tour. They want to take you around and show you their home. But we need to be in control of this situation. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I cannot wait to see your home. But before we take a look, let's sit down and have a conversation. I have a duty under license law and commission rule to disclose all material facts. The seller can hide behind caveat emptor. The seller can choose not to disclose. The broker always has a duty to disclose material facts. So what do we do about this? We have these conversations early. We set this expectation up front. Don't make your seller feel like you tricked them or deceived them or manipulated them into telling you something about the home. And you're over there taking notes saying, sweet, I got to tell all the buyers this. Let them know up front. Could that affect how they give their grand tour? Could that affect what they say? But even when I'm taking the grand tour, I still have to look out for my little red flags. So just because the seller doesn't tell me that the roof leaks, I see that stain on the ceiling. Didn't my little red flag go up to prompt me to ask some questions at seller? Like, hey, do you know about that? What's that from? They don't have to disclose. Caveat emptor is for the sellers, the owners. They don't have to disclose. License law and commission rule says we always have a duty. So we're going to talk about, again, the process, the listing procedure, how we can kind of give the sellers the heads up before they start blabbing every problem with the home. They can choose not to disclose. Once they hire a broker, one of the first things they need to understand is that we have a duty. I follow their lawful instructions. Alexis, we're getting to that. Yep. So what's this mean for us? There it is in writing. We always have a duty to discover and disclose material facts to all parties of the transaction. I can't use disclaimers. I can't use something to try to protect my liability. Buyer to verify would be an example of a disclaimer. I see it all the time in many listings. It's not going to get me out of anything. It's almost a waste of my type. That's not going to get me out. And we're always on the lookout for red flags. Question comes in, how are you supposed to look out for those red flags? I think a good rule of thumb is that what it looks like in your home? Let's say, for example, you and the seller are doing the grand tour and you get into the kitchen and you ask the seller straight up, are all appliances in the kitchen working? Is everything okay? And the seller says, yes, everything works fine. I scan the room, everything looks normal to me. I didn't have any red flags go up, right? Seller says everything's fine, nothing looked out of place to me. It's not like I'm going to say, well, I'll be the judge of that and run over there and turn the oven on and turn the burners on, make sure that it works. If they tell me everything works and I have no reason to think otherwise, then my red flag didn't go up. Now, what if you look at that oven and the oven door is like cockeyed and it's not sealed? I'm not an oven expert, but I know my oven at home doesn't look like that. Would that cause your little red flag to go up? Would that cause you to say, yeah, you bake cookies in that thing, you don't lose heat? That's what we're looking for, Rebecca, are those red flags, things that look out of the norm. And again, I got a couple articles for you guys for this weekend, so we'll look at those before we go, because I get it, you guys. I get it. I get it. So we got to make sure that we understand we're always looking. We're always smelling. We're always, don't walk into a room with your blinders on. When you walk into a room, look up, look at the walls, look at the floor, look at the ceiling. Does this look normal? And if not, your red flag is going up, prompting you to investigate. Can the seller hire an inspection? Sure. There's such a thing called a pre-listing home inspection. It's not as in-depth as what the buyer's going to get when they go under contract, but the seller could choose to have a home inspection. Buyers are encouraged to have a home inspection so they can learn about the property. More on home inspections coming in a couple units. Let's look at an example. So Carmen is a listing agent, and she's performing a listing presentation for Keith. During Carmen's walk through the property, she notices a stain on the ceiling, so she asks Keith about it. Does your little red flag go up? Stain, red flag. You guys hear me? I'm not telling you it's a water stain. That's kind of diagnosing a little bit, right? What if there's it's a first floor and there's another floor upstairs? Maybe there's a bathroom up there. Maybe there's not. I had an agent say maybe the cat's litter box is up there and they have bad aim, right? I don't know what caused that stain. All I know is, ooh, stain on the ceiling. I'm not telling you what kind of stain it is. I'm just saying stain on the ceiling. So she asked Keith about it. Keith says that the roof has a leak. It's been repaired like 3 times, and quite honestly, it needs to be replaced. Keith then goes on to say that that's one of the reasons why he wants to sell, is because he doesn't want to deal with replacing the roof. And then he looks at Carmen and says, don't tell anybody, because he will paint the ceiling before she lists. Buyers will never know. Does Carmen know that there's an issue? Now she does. And once she knows, you can't unknow. Did Carmen talk to Keith before they looked around and saw that stain? I sure hope so, because we never want our sellers specifically to feel that we're trying to trick them, that we're trying to manipulate them. I'm such a fan of communication, and setting those expectations up front. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, before we look at your home, you need to understand that my licensing body requires me to disclose property defects. You don't have to, but I do. When you see something out of the norm and need to bring in a professional, who is responsible for booking and paying? Or is it recommendation from us and not necessarily a requirement? So my job is to discover and disclose, hey, look, stain. Buyer, do you want to have somebody look into this? Do you want to bring in the roofer? I'm not buying this house, so I'm not paying for these inspections. I can make recommendations. You guys probably know or will know more roofers than the buyer does. So I can say, here's a couple roofing companies I've worked with. They're going to be responsible for having that inspected if they choose. I can't make anybody do anything. My job is to say, hey, look, stain, do you want to have that inspected? Do you want to have a roofer comes in? No, I'm fine. I'm not worried about it. What do we document? Everything. And that is something I would get in writing. By the way, I got a form for that. We don't look at it in this class, but just to help ease your minds a little bit, there's a form where buyers and sellers can select or waive various services. So if they waive the roofer, you can get that in writing. And now you have their documentation, not just their word, but their documentation saying that they're whatever, I can take care of that. Inspections, highly recommended. Buyers don't have, and again, I don't have a license to boss people around and make them do something. All I can say is it's highly recommended that you have a roofer or a plumber come in and look at this. No, I'm fine. Okie doke, initial here, saying that you've waived that service.
Now, Miss Julie, does that paper have to be notarized or anything, or is just their signature?
Nope, just both of our signatures, actually, Sandra. That's one I get to sign too, because I want to know them to know that I know that they waived that service. If they say as is, so all homes in North Carolina are as is. The onus, the responsibility to learn about it is on the buyer. So if the buyer says, I don't want to inspect or investigate nothing, I just want to buy the house. Initial and sign here. I can't make you. I can't make you. And the seller, you know, yeah, it's sold as is, meaning they don't have to disclose. They don't have to repair. Can I ask the seller as a buyer's agent to do repairs? Sure, you can ask. What's the worst they can tell you? No, I'm not going to fix it. I'm not going to fix the roof. I'm not going to look into this. They are all as is. Even brand new is as is. All homes, there's that absolute word, in North Carolina are as is. The seller doesn't have to disclose under caveat emptor. The seller doesn't have to fix. They can agree to, but they don't have to. They don't have to change a light bulb, y'all. They don't have to do anything. So as a buyer's agent, once we learn about all these problems, we can always ask the seller to do repairs. They can either agree to do some of them, all of them, or none of them. Totally up to the seller's discretion. Commercial is different. We're just talking residential. Again, commercial is a totally different beast. Good stuff, isn't it? Material
so-
facts. Yeah.
I have a question. So what you're saying is if the buyer does decide to get someone to look at the roof, the buyer is responsible for those fees, or
Yes.
can they negotiate something with the seller like, hey, you
Buyer's
know,
responsible, but anything is negotiable.
okay.
So the buyer could say, I want to have the roof inspected. Will you go in on this with me? The seller has every right in the world to say no, because caveat emptor says the responsibility, the onus to learn about the properties on who? On the buyer, not the seller. So who's responsible for paying for those inspections and investigations? The buyer. Remember, we said day one, anything's negotiable. By the way, where Keith went wrong, I blame Keith in this scenario. Because quite frankly, where Keith went wrong, why didn't he paint it for the 4th time before Carmen showed up? If Carmen never saw that stain, I can't disclose what I don't know. The reason she knows is because she saw the stain, her little red flag went up, and she said, I got to ask some questions about that stain. And then Keith just started blah, 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 and sharing it. Why did he paint it the 4th time before she showed up? Then it would have been a non-issue. When we get back from break, we're going to talk about something called a latent defect, or something that's not obvious, but we got to take a break. So let's take 10. We come back. Oh, more good stuff on material facts. back. So I'm going to take attendance, and I want to say a few things. Like I said, give you guys some resources, talk about a few things before we kind of go on for material facts. Let me make sure cameras are on. First off, a couple resources I want to share with you guys. I think to help us better understand these material facts. So if we look at the Unit 7 material, there's a lot in here, you guys, because there's a lot in Unit 7. I mean, we've been all night. We're what, 8 pages in, right? There's a lot in Unit 7. So that's all we're going to do next week is Unit 7. If you haven't looked at it yet, please do. But if we look at Unit 7, one thing we have in here, I got an article called Summary of Important Points, specifically about material facts. Now, we haven't talked about continuing education in this class yet, but we will, don't worry. And each year we have to do continuing education. And this is straight from our CE class, 2022, 2023 CE class. So it's only like a year old or so, 2 years, whatever. But what it does is it kind of gives us a nice little breakdown. And this thing is like 5 pages. So it gets really in depth with material facts, bullet points. It talks about red flags. It talks about common knowledge. I think this is more helpful for you guys because what do you have in your book? A page on material facts. So I think by giving you this gives you a lot more information. I think you guys should consider looking at this weekend to help you better understand material facts. The other thing, and I was just trying to see if it's a word in here or not. I'm not seeing it offhand. I'm not going to spend your time looking for it. But there's another word called latent defects. I know sometimes my accent isn't the easiest to understand. So there's something called latent defects. Latent is another way of saying not obvious or hidden. I can only disclose what I know. So if your red flag doesn't go up, if the seller doesn't tell you and you have no reason to question whatever, do I have anything to disclose? We can only disclose what we know. With that being said, what we can't do is hide our head in the sand. What we can't do is say, I don't see anything. We need to be looking for red flags. Don't always march up to you and slap you in the face. Sometimes we got to look for those red flags. And worst case scenario, you find something, your little red flag goes up and it causes you to say, I need to investigate this. But there's no issue. Everything's okay. That's a good problem, right? But at least you did your job by saying, ooh, red flag, something looks out of norm to me. Something looks out of practice. Again, if your red flag doesn't go up, if it's hidden, let's say didn't we say there were electrical issues behind this wall? If you walk in this room, there's nothing burnt around the outlets. We don't smell, electrical issues sometimes have like a smell to them. You don't smell anything. You walk in this room and there's no reason to know that there's electrical issues back here. The only way you could know for sure is if you ran out to your car, got your crowbar and busted into this wall and then investigated the electrical issues on your own. Is that what we want you to do? Never. Never destroy somebody's property trying to find material facts. What we are looking for are red flags. If they're hidden, if they're latent, if they're not obvious, then I have nothing to disclose. And we're going to talk about consequences of mishandling material facts in just a second. And one thing we're going to learn, the commission, if it goes down to the commission, they're going to ask themselves, would a reasonable person been able to see that? Would a reasonable person have been able to smell that or investigate and look? Does that make sense? So we're looking for this idea of common knowledge. What's the normal? With that being said, the other article, so we're in the Unit 7 material. This is summary of important points for material facts. We also have, again, I think it's down here under the Julie folder. Yeah, back under the Julie folder, I have an article in here for you guys. What is common knowledge? This is something that the North Carolina Real Estate Commission produced. I think it's like 2014. It's been a while, but it's so true to today. So the question comes in, how do I know that that's not normal? How do I know that that's not right? And that's what we need to look for. What you need to be on the alert for is this idea of common knowledge. Remember that oven door that's cockeyed? Is it common knowledge that oven doors are supposed to be secure to keep the heat in, to bake the cookies just right? Is it common knowledge that roofs don't have stains on them? That's what we're looking for, is that common knowledge. And I think this article does a great job of kind of helping us better understand that. So in addition to the whopping page they give you on material facts in your book, I got another resource for you guys as well. I don't know if I'll get to it tonight or not, but we know we have more to talk about next week. Like I said, you guys, we're going to be most, if not all of next week still in Unit 7. So it's a very in-depth, very thick unit, and we probably won't be able to finish everything with material facts. So the what is common knowledge is under the Julie folder. The bullet points about material facts is in the Unit 7 material. So be poking around at that. The other thing, I fast forwarded on my PowerPoints. Somebody says, pretend I'm the buyer. I love that. Walk into a home and ask yourself, if I was buying this home, would that be important to me? That kind of answers some questions right there for us, doesn't it? The other thing I want to share with you guys, we'll see this next week as we get further and further in our PowerPoints. Material facts have dominated the complaints down at the Real Estate Commission for the last couple years. This just happens to be from 2021, 22, 23. It was like 48% material facts. So the question is, what are agents getting in trouble for? What are the things that are causing disciplinary actions? 45%. Last year, it was like 48%. Material facts are huge right now. Agents are either, most likely what's happening is agents are not disclosing because we get shy and we don't want to prevent a buyer from buying. So I'll just keep that little secret to myself. Real estate is not the time to be shy. Real estate is to help that buyer and that seller with that investment. I tell you, we've had material facts in our CE classes for the last 3 years. I just heard at my commission meeting last week. Y'all know what our topic is for next year's CE? Daggum material facts. Across the state, we are not doing a good job at this, which is why it keeps showing up in CE. You guys, we're trying to get you out the gate. We're trying to get you guys handling these things properly. I don't want you to be a cause for disciplinary action. I don't want you to be a stat on this slide because you didn't disclose material facts for whatever reason. Corey, I agree with you completely. Like we said, you want to face disciplinary action. If you want to face the possible lawsuit, mishandle material facts. So again, I try to provide you guys with those other resources in the online learning system to help you better understand, to help you wrap your brain around, because it is tricky. And I do think in some cases it bumps on our moral compass. You've been hired by the seller, which means old car and fiduciary and all that good stuff. But yet you got to share all these material facts with the buyer customer. Remember, we follow their lawful instructions. So when they say, shh, don't tell anybody, that's not an instruction I can follow. Hear me, always have a duty to discover and disclose material facts. So again, we'll see those stats. I don't think we'll get to them tonight. Which means we do have more to talk about. This material fact discussion will probably continue next week. But again, you guys are looking it over this weekend, looking at those things, helping you to better understand them. So before we go on to how we mishandle, how we mistreat material facts. Do I have any questions so far? Please not about what we haven't covered yet, but do I have any questions so far, specific questions so far, before we talk about what happens if you mishandle a material fact?
I have a quick question.
Yeah, who am I talking to?
If I'm listing a new property, I know if we don't see anything out of the ordinary, we don't go snooping. But if I'm listing a new property and everything is brand new, should I not go in there and check everything and make sure everything is working properly, even if I'm not seeing it, you know?
So even in new construction, buyers are encouraged to have a home inspection. We should always encourage buyers to have a home inspection because, like we said, people building these, make mistakes, things happen. Rochelle, you're not the expert. You're not the Evan expert and the appliance expert. So you going in and checking everything, you're kind of getting out of your lane a little bit there. So how we stay in our lane is we tell our buyers, I understand this is new construction. I also understand in North Carolina, there's a 1-year builder warranty. Now, some builders are going to honor that better than others, but big picture, in North Carolina, there's a 1-year builder warranty. However, with that being said, you're still encouraged to have this home inspection because if we find something, we know the builder will address that. So remember, you guys, stay in your lane, which is why we are discovering and disclosing, not diagnosing. And there's a huge difference there. Yes. My job is to say, hey, look, that doesn't look normal. Let's bring the other expert in. Let's bring somebody else in to look at it, inspect it, check it out, whatever. Tell us if we're dealing with a big deal or not. I mean, is this a deal breaker? That's up to the buyer. Our job is to help them find this information so they can decide if it's a deal breaker or not. And you know what? Once you guys get licensed and you do a couple transactions, you start seeing common things over and over and over again. You may think after seeing 7 stains on the ceiling and come to find out all 7 are from the leaking roof, you may think you know something about a stain on the ceiling. But just because you've seen it before doesn't equip you to know something about it now. Does that make sense? You're still getting out of your lane. So I need you guys to, in practice, always ask yourself, is this part of my brokerage responsibility, or is this me pretending to act like a roofer or a plumber or a general contractor? Because I've had exposure and experience, or I have a brother-in-law that's a general contractor, so clearly I can answer these questions. You need to bring the brother-in-law in. You need to bring the roofer in. Can I make the buyer bring the roofer in? No, but it's my job to say, I recommend you should have this checked. Okay, so your friend, oh dear, y'all be careful about doing business with family and friends. So your friend expresses to you they have a leak in their house. Then they go to sell months later and hire you to sell it. You go into the house to look and they painted over the leak, so now you can't see it was there. Since the information was given, is that something disclosed? I don't know if I'm disclosing. My question is, hey, didn't y'all mention that leak? Did you get it fixed or did you just paint over it? I mean, what if you're selling mom and dad's house? Do mom and dad get an out because, they're mom and dad? Remember, the agency relationship is between the client and who? The firm. Mom and dad aren't hiring you. Mom and dad are hiring the firm. Your friend isn't hiring you. They're hiring the firm. So to your point, do friends talk? Of course. So I'm not saying you're going to disclose that your friend told you 6 months ago that they had a leaky roof. What I'm saying is you're going to ask your friend. And if they say, yes, we got it fixed, shouldn't they have receipts, invoices, something to show that they got it fixed? That's what we're looking for, you guys. And nobody gets special service because of your relationship with me, because that's not how agency is created. I'm allowed to work with my firm sellers, even if I call a mom and dad on the side. Isn't that something? Think that through. Mom and dad aren't hiring you. Careful about doing business with family and friends. So before we get into this discussion about how it can go down with material facts. What are the prohibited conducts, the prohibited acts that revolve around material facts? I want to back off from the book for a second. I'm going off book for a second, and I want to just define some basic words. And then when we define some words, we're going to do a mashup, and we're going to look at those prohibited conducts. So just defining some words. If you misrepresent something, you are putting false information out there. A misrepresentation is a lie. I don't care how you're getting it out there. Is it in your advertising? Is it in your conversation? Is it you talking to the other agent? Doesn't matter. Somehow you put false information about the property out there. An omission then says you didn't put that information out there. You omitted it. What does it mean to omit something? You left it out. You didn't tell them. You didn't email them. You didn't put it in your listing service. So misrepresentation is a lie. An omission is failing to tell, failing to disclose. Again, just defining some basic words. A willful act is one that is done intentionally, it's done deliberately, it's done on purpose with knowledge. You know, and you did it anyway. Compare that to a negligent act. It's done unintentionally. Negligent acts are accidents. They're mistakes. Anybody ever make a mistake? Anybody? Yeah. Do we make mistakes? Guess what, you guys? Our commissioners, they're people too. Do you think our commissioners ever make mistakes every once in a while? Sure, we're all human. It happens. The problem is once you discover you made that mistake and you don't correct it, you've acted negligently. It was an accident, but the truth is, the fact is, it still happened. So if we take those basic definitions and we do a mashup, we're on the bottom of page 143, and we're looking at our prohibited conducts. What can get you in trouble with the North Carolina Real Estate Commission with material facts? Willful misrepresentation, negligent misrepresentation, willful omission, and negligent omission. And yes, we're talking about each of these separately. Next. These are duties. You see my little bubble down there? This could get you in trouble, whether you mishandle material facts with a principal or a client, or you mishandle material facts with a customer or a third party, because we always have a duty to discover and disclose material facts. I don't care who you're talking to. If you mishandle material facts with a principal or a third party, a client or a customer, you could get yourself in trouble, disciplinary action, or the law, courts, on material facts. So let's take each of these and break them down. Willful misrepresentation. You have actual knowledge and you deliberately misinform. You know and you lie. Somebody flat out asks you, is the roof leak? Nuh-uh. But remember Keith and Carmen? Didn't Keith tell her it leaks? Didn't he tell her that he had to paint it 3 times? Does Carmen know the roof leaks? She has actual knowledge. And if she says, she has engaged in willful misrepresentation. She knew and she lied. Is that bad? You better believe it. Nobody ever has a golden ticket to lie, including licensees. Let's look at another example. So a seller's agent is aware. If you're aware, do you know? A seller's agent is aware that the present owners of the listed property have had serious problems with electrical. Nonetheless, the broker tells a prospective purchaser, all mechanical systems are in excellent condition. Did you know there was a problem with electrical? Did you lie about the problem with electrical? You just committed, you may be found guilty of willful misrepresentation. You knew and you lied. Willful misrepresentation.
Could you go back one, please? The slide before this.
Page 144. We also have negligent misrepresentation. You unintentionally misinform. You didn't know, but you could have found out. Hear me. I don't know. Let me get back to you is a perfectly acceptable answer, as long as you intend on getting back to them. If you have no intentions of getting back to them, then you say, I don't know, and you stop talking. So somebody asks you, and you're not sure, but it's just easier to say, nah, you knew or you lied, but you could have found out. That's it, Corey. And document. Don't just say, I talked to everybody that I could. Have that documentation, because what do we document? Everything. Here's the deal with any negligent act, misrepresentation or omission. If it makes its way down to the commission is going to perform what's known as the reasonable standards test. And the reasonable standards test is going to answer the question, would a prudent broker have known? Could they have found out? Let's go back to that zoning amendment. You didn't disclose a zoning amendment. Buyer buys, properties values increase, seller finds out about it, and they call you and they say, why didn't you tell me that this zoning amendment, this proposal for a zoning amendment? It goes down to the commission. The commission goes to that city's website and goes to the zoning page and finds the proposal on the website. Let me ask you a question. If the commission can find it and Google it, will they determine that a reasonable agent could have found it as well? Absolutely. We are the experts of our market. If they can go find that the school board lines are being redrawn, if they can find that DOT plans to widen the road in front of the property, then guess what? They're going to determine that you could have found that too. So any negligent act, misrepresentation or omission, any negligent act, the commission is going to ask themselves, would a reasonable broker have been able to find out that information? Guys, you're going to make mistakes in this industry. I probably count on two hands how many I made today. I'm just kidding, but you're with me, right? Mistakes happen. When you discover you made a mistake, fix it. Make it right. If you have interested buyers or buyer, let them know I made a mistake. It's okay. You got to fess up to it, fix it, so you can move on.
Julie,
Yeah.
how would you, in that situation, how would you fix that? Because isn't it kind of too late at that point?
Yeah, that case is too late.
Okay.
So, Tink, if I could give you an example, I had a listing once, and when I walked into the garage for these sellers, that's the moment that I learned that some people use those garages like their storage unit. This garage was like floor to ceiling boxes and totes, and there were paths. You couldn't have gotten a car in there if you wanted to. I assumed, where did I go wrong? I assumed that there was the contraction on the ceiling that opens and closes the garage door, right? So I put in there that something that's included, a fixture that's or something that's included is going to be the garage door openers, the little clickers and everything. Where did I go wrong? I assumed it's a newer home. It's got a garage. Clearly there's a garage door. I had a showing. Buyer's agent called me after the showing and she said, my guys aren't interested because da-da-da. And I said, thank you for your feedback. And she said, by the way, there is no garage door opening there. And I went, say what now? And she said, just wanted to let you know. I said, oh my gosh. So I hightailed it over to my seller's house, called him on the way, said, I'm on my way, ran in there, looked all around, come to find out there wasn't. Could the commission have walked in there and looked up and seen that there wasn't a garage door? Could a reasonable person have found out? I went right back. I don't even think I went back home. I sat in my car in their driveway and went back into the listing service. I took that out. Had I had an interested buyer at that time, then I would have communicated with their agent and said, by the by. Because at the end of the day, quite frankly, between me and you, I would rather have bought somebody else a new garage door opener than face disciplinary action or a lawsuit. So you may be able to get yourself out of it. Commission can't make me do that, but that might have been, you know, an action to keep me out of trouble. I made a mistake. It happens. And you know what? I fixed it. And I'm so, to this day, very grateful for that agent. She even said, Julie, we all work hard enough for our commission anyway. We got to help each other out. And I said, my goodness, thank you so much. Y'all know what I do since I've been in every garage since then? I can't help it. I walk in and look up and see if they have that thing. By the way, they bought it as a foreclosure and those previous owners gutted it. They took it out and they said, well, we were going to use it as storage, so we didn't see the need to put it back in. You learn, you live and you learn, you guys. I made a mistake. We're recording. I'm on YouTube tomorrow, fessing up to my mistake. But I'm also telling you guys, as soon as I learned about it, I made it right. And that's all we can do. You're going to make mistakes. That agent called me, my little red flag went up, and I beelined it over there. My poor seller was going, is everything okay? I'm like, yeah. I just gotta see something real quick, you know? So you guys will too make mistakes. The question is, with negligent misrepresentation, you lied, but you could have found out otherwise. So an example, while viewing a property in a subdivision, the buyer tells their agent they want to build a large storage building in the backyard and asks if that would be permissible. Buyer's agent calls the listing agent and is told everybody else in the subdivision has a storage building, so I'm sure your buyer can as well. Nobody bothered to check the covenants, nor did the buyer's agent provide a copy of the covenants to the buyers. Guess what? Both agents could go down in that situation, because couldn't both of them have found out? Couldn't have both of them got their hands on the covenants and found out that a storage building? Both of them could go down for negligent misrepresentation. They lied, but they could have found out. Reasonable standards test. So 2 misrepresentations. We also have 2 omissions. Willful omission, you have actual knowledge, but you omitted it. You didn't disclose it. Again, the vehicle for disclosing it is not dictated by the commission. They don't care how we disclose this information, just that we do. Willful omission says you know, and you didn't disclose it. You didn't put it in your advertising. You didn't tell the other agent. You didn't call, you didn't text, you didn't put that information out there. You know, and you kept your mouth shut. Honestly, I think this is the one, because again, we get shot. I don't know this buyer. And I know my seller doesn't really want me to tell because, you know, it could affect this and that and everything else. Commission rule, license law and commission rule says no. Once we learn, once we have actual knowledge, we now have a duty to disclose. Failure to do so could go down as willful omission. So a seller's agent, again, is aware. These are key words that we're looking for here. Do they know? If you're aware of something, do you know? I don't care how you learn it. If you're aware, you know that the listed property has suffered extensive termite damage that's not easily detectable. Maybe it's in the deep, dark corner of the crawl space. I'm not expected to go back there. And even if I did, what good would it do me? I'm not a termite expert. I'm not a, crawl space expert. The general rule of thumb is they say head and shoulders. Poke your head in there. If something looks out of place, little red flag. But guys, we're not expected to go into crawl spaces and crawl around all in there. So it's not easily detectable. You poked your head in there, you didn't see it. Regardless of whether a prospective purchaser actually inquires about it or not, the broker has a duty to disclose this material fact. This is a case of, don't ask, don't tell, or it's not a case of don't ask, don't tell. Well, the buyer didn't ask about termite damages, so I don't have a duty to tell them. Once we know, once we have actual knowledge, once we're aware, we don't have to wait for them to ask. We have a duty to tell. Failure to do so could go down, willful omission. And then the other one, the last, by the way, I call these the big four, the prohibited conducts, the big four. The last of the big four is negligent omission. You don't know, but the reasonable standards test says you could have found out. Again, if the commission can do a quick Google search and find it, for example, you could have found out. Would a reasonable broker been able to find out? Don't tell people something for the sake of telling people something. Like I said, I don't know. Let me get back to you is a perfectly acceptable response. So our example here, broker is viewing a house in February to list. The house is unusually cold, but the broker doesn't ask about the heat. So you're sitting in a listing appointment in your coat and hat, gloves and scarf, and you have no need to take those off because it's freezing cold in the house. Should your little red flag go up? Gee, I'm cold. Can we turn the heat on? As it turns out, the heat pump is inoperable. Buyer buys without being informed. Listing agent is guilty of negligent omission because they could have found out. Goodness, I'm cold. Do you mind to turn the heat on? The seller is going to say, oh yeah, it doesn't work. If the seller lies, you still have your little red flag going up, right? And keep in mind, you guys, I know, hang on. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't the home inspector find out? Buyers don't have to have home inspections. They can choose not to. I don't know why they wouldn't. I mean, the costs are negligible when it comes to buying a house, but they don't have to. All we can do is encourage them. So this one decides not to do it. They buy the house, and guess what? There's a reason why it was cold in that house in February. If your flag goes up for any reason, you cannot ignore it. You have this duty to investigate, to ask questions. If the seller says it's fine, I'm just cheap and I don't want to turn it on, like, well, let's just kick it on for a second because I have this duty to verify it. If they're just not gonna do it, my little red flag is screaming at me now, right? Something's telling me something's up. I shouldn't have said they're cheap. Maybe they're frugal. Let's say they're frugal. We've got to, again, you guys, we're not ostriches. We cannot hide our head in the sand and say, oh, I'm just going to ignore the fact that I'm freezing cold, or I'm going to ignore the fact that I smell something that smells basement-y, or I see a stain on the ceiling.
Okay, Ms. Jewel, I have a question. So say our red flags, but then we know that, like, in our mind, okay, the heat's not working, but how do we, maybe I missed this. So how do we go by finding out, hey, does it work or not, without them getting kind of offended, without the seller getting offended by saying, hey, turn the heat on or whatever?
So Sandra, this is why we want to have these conversations up front, right? As early as we can. So I have this duty to discover and disclose material facts. So by the time I'm asking specific questions about the heat, for example, the seller should know why I'm asking these questions. We can't not have this conversation because then our sellers feel like we've trapped them. And that's not how we want the consumer to feel. That's not how we protect the public, right? So we need to be open and upfront at the beginning of that listing appointment. You know, I think I'm just going to leave my coat on and, you know, so we set these expectations. I think that's one of the way that we combat this. Sometimes there's nothing we can do not to hurt their feelings. You know, this is business and you guys are held under license law and commission rule to conduct yourselves in a certain way. So sometimes we got to ask the hard questions, you know, when we, especially when we meet with sellers and buyers. Another thing we got to ask sellers early on, what's your debt? What's your outstanding debt on this property? We'll talk more about that, but you know, it'd be very easy for a seller to say, I just met this chick and she's already asking me about how much I owe on the property, what my debt is. But that's information that we need to know to protect both of us. Again, more on that. If you sold something to someone that didn't need it, and then they complained about it, you lost your job. They got whatever they actually needed for free. Lying to people and taking people for money would actually infuriate them. I agree. Nobody's allowed to lie, right? So we're going to be upfront. We're going to tell the seller early. We're going to set these expectations. Don't let them tell you all the house defects. You're sitting there taking notes. And then at the end say, sweet, I got to share that with potential buyers. Sellers just feel like it's hard to trust you after that, isn't it? So having these conversations up front, and I get it, you guys, I get it. This is not easy, but remember, you are the professional in this transaction, and we need to make sure that we conduct ourselves as such. Good stuff, huh? There are, look with me in your book, pages 144 to 146. It not only goes over the big four, but it also gives you guys examples of each. I think the examples help. I think the definitions are okay, but I think the examples help for you to see those specifics. If you see a test question on the big four, probably what's going to happen is you're going to get a scenario and the questions are going to be, or the answer choices are going to be, was this willful misrepresentation? A, B, negligent misrepresentation, C, willful omission, or D, negligent omission. When you guys are looking through these examples, when you are preparing for this exam and this question comes up, I would ask yourself first, did the broker in this scenario lie, or did they keep their mouth shut? Did they misrepresent, or did they omit? Once you determine that, then I suggest going back through and determining if it was done willfully or negligently, looking for those key words like broker is aware, broker has actual knowledge. But ask yourself first, did they lie or omit? And then ask yourself, was it done intentionally or unintentionally? I believe willful acts are going to be handled, they're going to have much more severe consequences than negligent, because willful is done with intent. It's done with knowledge. You did it and you know you did it. Negligent, I'm not saying you not get in trouble because of negligent, because again, the reasonable standards test. But I think purposely doing something is a lot worse than accidentally doing something. And that's the difference in willful and negligent. So again, was it a misrepresentation or an omission? And then was it done willfully or negligently? An omission from the truth is still a lie. That's right. That's right.
Does any of this carry like jail time?
I guess if you really mess up, Tink, so they could, you could sue anybody for anything, right? Let's just put real estate aside for a second. You can sue anybody for anything. The next question is, how far are they going to get? I don't know if you could get jail time, but you could be fined by the court, not by the commission, but by the court. God, you'd have to really mess up. So I know we're not gonna do that. But I mean, if it's severe enough, guys, remember, what's the commission's number one main purpose? To protect me? No, to protect the public. If you harm their public, you will face disciplinary action. We'll talk about that disciplinary action next week. My other thing to you is if this does go to court, this is why I got you guys documenting everything, because that's all you got. That's all you got.
So when you say document everything, is there like a form that you'll get for, or that you'll do for each client, or is it kind of up to you to like notified buyer of stain on ceiling, declined inspection, like that kind of thing?
Yep, I would go home and follow it up with an email, be like, you know, per our conversation, I pointed the stain out. You chose to, you know, do you want to have it inspected? And they're going to reply and say no. Right? So now, I mean, you're not flat out asking, I need you to prove, no, you're just saying, as we discussed, I suggested the roofer or whatever. Is that still servicing? And they say no. Now you have your documentation, and we have that form where we can waive that service. Exactly, Ashley. There's that old saying, if you didn't document it, it never happened. So document it to prove that it happened. Document, and you might be, you know, because we're face to face, you know, we might be there. And if it's something important like that, then I would definitely go home and follow it up with an email or a text and get that response. So now you have that. And like I said, we got the form. As far as you getting, you know, you may have your own checklist. Your firm will provide you guys with checklists, but you may have your own as well. So we need to create your own as you go, right? We got some seller disclosures. We're going to look at those in Unit 8. Again, even though the seller doesn't have to disclose, caveat emptor, you and I do, but it kind of gives us the opportunity to have that conversation with the seller as they're doing that form. Yeah.
That's my question.
Benjamin, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm kind of trying to think of how I'm going to phrase it. What is you're representing both the buyer and the seller?
I
How do
always have a duty to discover and disclose material facts.
the both of them?
Always.
Always.
We're going to talk about what you guys are asking about. I hear you. What you're asking about is something called dual agency. We'll talk about that next week, but I always have a duty to discover and disclose material facts, even if I'm representing both parties in the transaction.
So where do your loyalty lies? I mean, with both of them, but
We're going to talk about dual agency next week.
Okay.
And you can
Thank
look ahead this weekend before we get there. But yeah, we're getting into that next week. Bear with me. Rebecca. So I think that's the third CYA. We've talked about call your attorney and call your accountant. The third CYA, cover your assets. See what I did there? Cover yourself, protect yourself. And how do you do that? With your documentation. Guys, that's all you got. Like I said, you're not going to be able to stand in front of a judge and say, I didn't do that, or I did, or whatever. They're always going to want to see your documentation. So I'm going to call, don't go anywhere yet. I'm going to call it here for tonight, but let's look what we talked about. I know somebody asked me about stigmatized properties. That's coming up next. So we're going to pick up on page 146, and we're going to talk about stigmatized property and sex offenders. In North Carolina, these things are not material facts, meaning I don't have to volunteer. It's right in your book, page 146. You can read it. Meaning I don't have to volunteer the information. However, if I'm asked, I never have a golden ticket to lie. So we're going to talk about these things that are not material facts in North Carolina. We'll go over briefly some additional duties there. There's your liabilities and consequences. And then we're going to get into creating agency, the different types of agency that your firm may offer. So we'll get into single agency, dual agency, how we can work with both parties, what's that means. The last big piece, once we get through that, the last big piece of Unit 7 then is agency disclosure. So we have a duty to disclose my agency status when I meet consumers, when we're very early in the relationship. So they know where I stand. They know whose side I'm on. We want to make sure that they understand the big thing about agency disclosure. I don't owe you confidentiality until and if you decide to hire me. Remember, it's only the client that gets OLCAR. So if you never hire me, I never owe you confidentiality. Isn't that only fair to the consumer that I say that early instead of letting them blab all the information and I'm just standing there taking notes, writing down all this information. So we'll talk about that duty to disclose my agency, to tell my agency status. Like I said, we might get started in Unit 8 next week, but if we do, it probably won't be too far. So what I'm telling you guys is most of next week, we're still going to be in Unit 7. Please, 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 if you haven't yet, please look over those couple, that bullet points for material facts and that common knowledge article. I think that'll help solidify some things. And always remember, I'm available to answer questions if I can help sort things out as well. Anything else? I'll share with you guys, I did a post licensing class the last 2 weekends. And one of the post licensing classes you'll have to take is brokerage relationships and responsibilities, which is just a fancy way of saying agency. So once you get your license, you can look forward to 30 more hours of Units 7 and 8. And with material fact, I know, right? With material facts showing up so much in CE, we spent a good amount of time talking about it. And by the end of the class, my post-licensing class, I had everybody going, we always have a duty to discover and disclose. I said, are y'all dreaming about this stuff yet? And they said, we are. And I said, good. That's how we keep you out of disciplinary action. Hear that word, you guys. Is there ever a reason not to disclose a material fact? That's not what always means. So yeah, by the end of the class, they were like, oh God, Julie, we get it. Do you? Because we always, 48% of the disciplinary action cases last year, 45% the year before, were mishandling material facts, the big four. So it's important that we know enough to get you through your state exam, but rest assured there's more coming in post-licensing. There's more in CE, more from your BIC, from your firm. This is just the beginning of your material facts. And that's what it is. Until we can do better at this across the state, expect to see it in CE. It is what it is. So I leave you with that. You guys have a good weekend. Let me know if there's anything I can do. Be safe, everybody, and we'll see you next Tuesday.